Right, we're all here, all victualled and ready to go, ready for a, well, what shall we say, transport, yes.
I think so, sir. So with your leave, we'll hear firstly in terms of traffic modelling from Miss Sue. So I think she's on the line. The first thing I'm going to do is a preemptive apology to Emma for my pronunciation of her surname. As someone who's suffered from mispronunciations all my life, I'm sensitive to it. So I'm sorry, Emma. Perhaps you can just let me know how I'm to correctly pronounce your surname.
Miss Twee.
Right. Sweet. Okay. Right. Thank you. So over to you. Now, I understand, Emma, you've got a primary statement of evidence dated the 20th of October, and I understand that that doesn't include a summary statement, but you do have a series of paragraphs from your primary statement that you'd like to read.
Yep.
So you can feel free to take the commissioners through your evidence now.
Cool. So thank you so much. Thank you very much, Mr. Madoni. So in the start, I would like to make some corrections. So there are two corrections that I wanted to make in association with my statement. I propose to read the following before I begin presenting my evidence. There are Okay, so both two corrections I would like to make to my statement dated 20 October 2021. Both of them relate to Appendix A of my statement. So firstly, the memo in Appendix A is incorrectly dated 20 October 2021. Would you please change the date to read 12 October 2021? Yep. Secondly, in section 2.2 of the memo, reference is made to the WRTM. Would you please delete the following words from the memo, which is part of the Waikato Regional Transport Model, WRTM. This means that the first sentence of section 2.2 of the memo should read as, we have used the trip generation rates from Taupo traffic model, namely. The memo then goes on to list those trip generation rates. There are no other corrections that I need to make to my statement. Therefore, I would like to continue by reading from a summary of my 20 October statement of evidence.
Let me note, if you wouldn't mind making that correction on the memo and sending us a copy through of the correction, that would be appreciated.
Yeah.
Thank you. So both the date and that particular paragraph change.
Cool, thank you, Commissioner. So now I will start by reading through a copy of the key points of my statement that I want to bring to your attention. So now I'm moving to my statement. I'll start at paragraph 7. Okay. So I have been involved in PC 37 since 2019 when I was engaged to undertake a traffic impact assessment for the applicants. I was the lead author of the November 2019 TIA titled Nukuhau Private Plan Change Taupo. The report was reviewed by my former colleague, Mr. Toby Okuman, who agreed with and supported the contents of the report. Now move on to paragraph number 8. I was not directly involved with the preparation of the 28 October 2020 version of the TIA, which is Appendix E to the Plan Change Request Report. However, the content of the Issue 2 is largely the same as that of Issue 1. My name appears in the document history because my involvement with Issue 1.
Are there any matters in that you don't agree with?
No, I agree with everything in the Issue 2 of the TIA.
Thank you.
I was involved with preparation of the 22 September 2021 memo provided to Mr. Hamish Calford that describes the results of additional transport modelling carried out by myself and reviewed by Mr. Alan Liu of WSP. My evidence concentrates primarily on the content and recommendations of the 2020 TIA and the additional traffic modelling described in the memos. Cool. I'll now move on to paragraph 410 of my evidence, which I'll be talking about the summary of the traffic impact assessment.
Yep.
The purpose of the original TIA was to assess potential traffic impacts generated by PC37. Moving on to paragraph 18 now, where I will be talking about traffic modelling for the TIA. The Taupō traffic model was run for 5 scenarios, with each scenario including traffic models for the AM and PM peak hours. Move on to paragraph number 20. For each of the model scenarios, the modelling considered traffic generation from future land use with and without PC37. We inquired regarding the assumed future land use in the model and were advised by Stantec that the council have said to assume development near the airport, so there's only a small amount of infill north of the river. CIDRA was used to analyze the performance of 7 key intersections in the vicinity of the site. Intersection turning volumes were extracted from the Taupō traffic model and used in CIDRA models for the key intersections for both AM and PM peaks. Results of the CIDRA modelling are summarised in Table 8-4 of the updated TIA. Now moving on to paragraph number 22, where I will be talking about additional modelling that's included as part of the 12 October 2021 memorandum. We carried out additional CIDRA modelling to understand the performance of the Control Gate Bridge, Norman Smith Street, Wariki Drive intersection, and Spy Road, Tongariro Street roundabout. The modelling considered scenarios with existing permitted land development north of the bridge and with PC37 before. There is a second bridge across the Whakaaro River to provide access to Taupō from the north.
Can I just confirm that modelling in that second part of that, you assumed a full build out, so a complete population for PC37?
For this, I have done different scenarios.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to ask, because I mean, just in lieu of, with respect to Mr. Heath's evidence earlier,
yeah.
I mean, he indicated only 140 dwelling demand in the next 10 years. So
yeah.
did you model that? You modelled that scenario?
So as part of my evidence, that scenario was not included because we only got the copy of the economics report the day when it's due. So I carried out additional modelling based on Mr. Heath, 140 houses and 997 houses north of the bridge. So those modelling were done, but they were not provided to you. We're happy to present those information to you later on, though.
Well, it would seem to be relevant.
Yep.
And you might just, if you've got those in your head, you might just tell us what the output of that modelling was when you get to the end of your presentation.
Yeah, cool.
Mr. Hill, if I can just step in briefly at the moment. So Ms. Sui and I worked on a memo that's just been finalised this morning. I understand Mr. Muldowney has a copy of that memo. And either Ms. Sui or myself could go through the key points of that memo with you today, if that's acceptable from Mr. Muldowney's perspective.
Well, having put him on the spot, he could hardly say no. Well done. It's not often you get to blindside the lawyer.
My preference usually is to read evidence before I submit it. But what the heck? So I've just had the
I'm happy Mr. Muldowney, I'm happy for you to review that, and we'll hear it tomorrow if that's more appropriate.
Sir, I'm relaxed. I understand it's basically a memo that's been prepared literally, well, certainly circulated just in the last half hour, and it appears to simply update the modelling exercise based on that demand that Mr. Heath was referring to this morning. The upshot of it is that it actually demonstrates that the previous modelling is conservative, and that there's actually a slight improvement in the overall situation. So unless I get corrected by my traffic engineers, I'd say that's probably good evidence to submit. So I'm comfortable to have it uploaded.
Yeah.
I'll just arrange for that to be sent to the hearing secretary now, and everyone can then obviously get access to it.
Appreciate that. Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Sweet.
Thanks. I will now move on to paragraph 23, where I will be talking about the traffic volumes used in the traffic models, including traffic generation distribution. So trip generation and distribution assessments were carried out to determine the additional trips generated from the permitted land developments and PC37. I refer to the memo included as Appendix A to my full statement of evidence. Now moving on to paragraph 29, modelling outcomes. We set up the routes and consider network in all modelled scenarios to understand the overall en-route travel between and including the Norman Smith Street, Wairiki Drive intersection and the Spa Road roundabout via the Control Gates Bridge. The routes modelled and the summarised predicted results are described in the table in the tables below. So that's table 1 and table 2. En route travel times, AM peaks and PM peak. I'm not proposed or planning to read out the table line by line, but I will now move on to paragraph 30 of my statement, where I have some key points.
Just to check with you too, on our copies of evidence, those are labelled table 2 and 3. Just make sure we're looking at the same tables.
Yes, we're probably looking at the same table. I'm just reading through my summary. I think the table number has changed.
Yeah, that's fine. No worries. Just be sure.
Cool. So now paragraph number 30, we compared the modelled outputs of travel time for the permitted land development only against the permitted land development with PC37 traffic. From the comparison, we noted in the AM peak, the worst route was route 4, which had a travel time increase of around 3 minutes. So just want to add on that, the 3 minutes was based on the full development of Nukuhau. In the PM peak, the worst route was route 6, which had a travel time increase of around 3.3 minutes. Paragraph number 31, acknowledging that the...
Just a question whilst you're on that one. How quickly did that time decay? How long did it take to clear that 3 minutes down to, say, 30 seconds?
So I think that's case by case. Normally the peak hour we model is for an hour. And based on what we found on Google Maps, the absolutely peak time, the worst time was around the 15 minutes interval.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Acknowledging that the graphical information was not included in the memorandum, Appendix B of my full statement of evidence contains diagrams illustrating the relative levels of service for different elements of the routes that were considered. These diagrams illustrate the point raised by Mr. Spears in his statement, paragraph 43, that the Control Gates Bridge is not necessarily the only constraint that results in increased travel times. The full details of the modelling outcomes are set out in section 3.3 of the memorandum, which is attached to my full statement of evidence as Appendix A. Thank you, Commissioner. So that's end of my summary statement.
All right. Kevin, do you have any questions on the modelling and the outputs of the modelling?
No, just more a question around that last statement, and I guess I get it. The bridge is not necessarily the only constraint. I guess my question would be, looking at that, if you identified another constraint in the system as being equal or greater than, could you not apply the reverse argument? Or does that make sense in terms of my question?
Just clarify what the reverse argument would be.
Well, if you say, well, it's actually, if you say the constraint might be the roundabout or it might be the intersection with Norman Smith Street, that's the constraint. A proponent of that being not an issue? Could he equally say the constraint is the bridge, not the intersection, reversing the argument around there? So I guess the bridge is a continuum in a chain of constraints. I guess if we say, if we fix the bridge, what's left to fix? And if we don't fix the bridge, where does the problem sit?
So to answer that question, the reason why we had a statement in there that the control gates bridge is not necessarily the only constraint that results in increasing travel times, that was based on the network modeling result. So in the network modeling, we have modeled 3 intersections, including the Norman Smith intersection, the bridge, and also the Spa Road Roundabout. And in the network, one of the kind of key elements of network is that they kind of consider the oversaturated or the bottleneck from upcoming strain. And basically the modeling indicates for the AM peak, it's not only the bridge acting as a constraint, it's also the Spa Road, for the AM peak, it's also the Norman Smith intersection that's kind of restricting the vehicles coming down through to the bridge. For the PM peak, it's the same scenario. The modeling shows that the roundabout is holding up some traffic from coming into the bridge. So what I'm saying there is everything is linked and they are interacting and impacting each other. So it's not really by saying that, oh, the bridge is the only issue and we need to fix the bridge. It's also how everything's linked up.
Yep, thank you. That was my point, and that hits it quite squarely. Yeah.
Let me ask a follow-up question on that one then is if there are three pinch points effectively in terms of the network modeling, if you remove, say you remove the Spa Road roundabout constraint, what does that then do in terms of freeing up the other 2? I mean, we know, is it a matter of having to solve all 3 together, or is it a question of if you unblock one, then suddenly you get a free flow?
I think that's also a case by case. I think, in my opinion, if we free up the roundabout, that will actually maybe have a better impact on the bridge, or the overall performance of the network maybe will be a lot better if we fix up the roundabout.
So I guess the question is the roundabout the priority to be resolved, or is it the bridge? Because what I'm hearing you saying, and Mr. Swears, you can come in on this conversation if you want to, but what I'm hearing you saying is that solving the bridge problem does not solve the problem.
I think it would be. Sorry, Ms. Swear, go ahead.
I think that likely will be the result, or maybe it's the other way. It's the other ones. Maybe if after we solve the bridge is acting as one of the constraints between the 2 intersections. If we increase the capacity of the bridge, maybe that will solve the traffic coming through and below the bridge. But Mr. Spears, please add on to my
just
question.
Before you answer, Mr. Spears, I mean, what I have in mind, of course, and I hate to be Auckland-centric about this, but I mean, on our motorway system, there are deliberate engineered choke points in order to actually facilitate the onward flow of the motorway system. And I'm just wondering whether this is that sort of an example.
The example you're referring to, I'm assuming you mean the ramp metering for the motorway system.
Well, no, that's not the only point. There's also a reduction of lanes coming in.
Yep.
On the southern motorway. So it's a combination of those things.
I mean, without running the modelling and recognising that Ms. Swee has the expertise in modelling, not me, but without running the modelling for those particular scenarios, it would be a little bit hard to answer that on the fly. But picking up on the point that Ms. Swee raised, so if you've got the constraint at the Spa Road roundabout, which is controlling the rate at which traffic can get to the bridge, then obviously if you took out the Spa Road roundabout, then you wouldn't have a constraint for traffic getting to the bridge, and then the capacity of the bridge would be the constraint that led to the reduced level of service.
Yeah, but we're not talking about traffic flowing from the south, are we? We're talking about traffic flowing from the north in terms of PC37.
It's both. So in the morning, you're expecting most of the traffic to be coming from the north, and in the evening, you're expecting most of the traffic to be coming from the south.
Yeah, okay, right. I mean, the reason I'm asking the question, of course, is that we have a recommendation from council saying defer until the bridge control issue is sorted. No, the gate is sorted. But if that's not actually the end of the problem, then that's not a particularly helpful suggestion. So I don't know whether we're actually going to require more modelling to be done to be satisfied as to how these all relate together or what. But anyway, top of mind at this particular point. So let's just go. Oh, sorry, Mr. Swees, you were called in to answer a question. I can't even remember what the question was.
Yes, I was just coming in to respond to the request, the question in relation to upstream constraints. So I'll just step out and let Ms. Swee finish.
We'll be back to you in a second, I'm sure. Yeah, thank you. All right, Dale, any questions of Ms. Swee? No? All right, well done. You get away relatively scot-free, so that's good on you. We'll be back later on tomorrow, I suspect, on some other matters. Yeah.
That then leads us on to Mr. Swears. So if we can get him back, and Mr. Swears, you've produced a summary statement of your evidence dated the 5th of November. Just before you move to that, just confirm the content of your primary statement of evidence dated 20 October.
Yes, I do.
And you can just move to your summary statement and pick it up from paragraph numbered 5.
Okay, if I can just go back a step. Mr. Chair, similarly to Ms. Swee, there's some mistakes in my statement. So there's a consistently applied mistake through my statement of the 20th of October. And in that, I refer to the Waikato Regional Transportation Model, the WRTM, rather than to the Taupo traffic model. So I've referred to the wrong model. It doesn't have any effect on my conclusions. But anywhere you read WRTM, it should read Taupo traffic model.
Are you suggesting by that modelling is irrelevant, are you?
I do drop a couple of hints in my statement that I'm slightly sceptical about modelling, which I realise sounds a bit strange coming from someone working in my industry. Which is why I rely on experts like Ms. Swee in relation to modelling.
Right.
And there's another line in there where I just note that Ms. Swee correctly refers to the Taupo traffic model, so I'm the one who made the mistake.
Right. Okay.
So, Mr. Muldowney, you're suggesting I start at paragraph 5 of my summary?
Mm-hmm.
The traffic modelling results described by Ms. Swee in her statement and in her summary indicate significant increases in travel time as a result of development of existing residential zoned land on the northern side of the Waikato River. However, I consider that the extent of the development to the north of the bridge is if the extent of development to the north of the bridge is reduced to lower levels of residential development, the effects on the transport network will be less than indicated in the modelling described in my statement. Trip generation associated with the project will increase travel times. If that traffic is added to future trip generation, that might also occur. However, if the project proceeds and offsets residential development that might otherwise occur within existing residential zoned land, the project presents the opportunity for a reduction in motor vehicle trip generation through some of the trips being transferred to active modes. In my opinion, this is the fundamental component of the site that means the project is less likely to result in adverse transport engineering effects than might otherwise occur. Paragraph 7.
Yeah, I guess I mean that's. I had to puzzle that one through in your primary statement for a while to try and work out what it was that you're actually positing at that point, because I've seen no evidence to suggest that the demand might come from people moving from south of the bridge to north of the bridge, for example, which would produce the effect that you're talking about. But you must be talking about some other effect. So can you just clarify?
I mean, I explain it in my full statement. What I'm saying is that because of the location of Nukuhau relative to the Taupo CBD, if everything else was equal, so let's say we've got 1,000 dwellings being established on the northern side of the river, If you've got Nukuhau, then some of that 1,000 lots can be contained with the Nukuhau development. And because of the proximity of Nukuhau to Control Gates Bridge and to the Taupo CBD, it presents the best opportunity for some of the motor vehicle trips to be turned into active mode trips, so walking and cycling.
I understand that. But you're talking about a reduced level.
Yes, and
You're
that's
talking about a theoretical reduced level, are you? Is that what we're now talking about?
no, I'm talking about an actual reduced level.
Yeah, that's what I
So,
thought.
so if all else is equal, there would be no change. So if the number of lots on the northern side of the river is the same with or without Nukuhau, there would be no change except, or sorry, it would be no worse than no change. But with Nukuhau, because it's got an increased potential to result in active mode trips, you actually have the potential to reduce the number of trips. But then linking back to what Mr. Heath said this morning, he anticipates that there would be some additional trips if Nukuhau is developed and you've got the existing areas of development. And at the point where I blindsided Mr. Muldowney earlier this afternoon, we've just completed some modelling which describes the results of the effects if you've got the 997 lots that Mr. Heath identifies in existing zoned land, plus 140 lots in Nukuhau. So there are.
Sorry, those additional lots are still over the bridge.
That's right. So, yeah, so 997 without Nukuhau.
In what area though? I mean, to what extent?
That covers all of your Acacia Bay and your Brentwood and your Kinloch, just all of the areas that you've got existing zoning for. So it's 997 without Nukuhau and 1,137 with Nukuhau.
Right. Okay.
So moving to paragraph 7, and this is where my first mistake comes in. I consider that the use of the Taupo traffic model rather than the WRTM to identify traffic volumes to be used for modelling purposes for the project is generally appropriate and there is no better tool available. However, outputs from the Taupo traffic model will not necessarily match reality. The modelling results presented by Ms. Swee are based on the best information presently available. However, I do not expect traffic growth and land use development to proceed in exactly the manner described in the model. Therefore, I consider that modelling results should be regarded as a reasonable indicator of relativity between options, but they do not provide a perfect prediction of the future. That's sort of one of those that goes without saying type thing, Mr. Chair.
Just before you move on there, I'm still pondering this 997 figure. When was that land zoned for residential development?
That I
recently zoned?
That I don't know.
I mean, I guess my question was whether the traffic modelling for that 997 in actual fact indicated that that it was going to create an issue or it wasn't going to create an issue, or maybe council can answer that later on in terms of the Mr. Bonnet. Maybe you can answer that in due course. Just want to understand whether that has recently been approved and therefore or was approved some time ago and has been latent in the model for some period of time, or whether that's new information.
I mean, Mr. Smith would probably be able to contribute in relation to answering that as well.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So paragraph 9, as traffic volumes and delay increase, road user behaviour may change in order to avoid the delays. For example, a road user may change the time at which they commence their journey, or they may select a different mode of travel. By changing travel times and extending peak periods, road users can flatten and spread the peak, which means the delay per road user can be reduced. And in figures 2 and 3 of my statement, they illustrate peak spreading on the Auckland motorway by comparing a 2000 flow profile with a 2019 flow profile. And coming back to a point you raised this morning, Mr. Hill, I'm not suggesting that traffic and congestion in Taupo is going to end up as it is in Auckland, but those two graphs I think provide a really good example of how road user behaviour can change to minimise the effect per road user.
And your
Can I
models
just-
going forward are going to have some real difficulty accounting for COVID in due course, aren't they?
Yeah, and I guess then I suppose that's based on the assumption that people have a choice, which may not be the situation for, say, picking up kids from school or.
To an
Like
extent, it does reflect that.
Yeah, so there'll be some variation in the model, right, around to allow for those differences between, I guess, unless you're really onto it and decide to go and sit outside of school for a quarter of an hour, which people won't do. But is that quite a significant contributor, the school traffic, to the peak times?
The peaks that we've looked at, and we may need to jump in again here, from recollection, the PM peak doesn't incorporate school pickups. The morning peak probably does. From memory, it's sort of around the 8:30 peak, but the PM peak was around about 5 o'clock, recognising we look at a peak hour period.
Mm-hmm.
Just in response to the point you raised before, Mr. Hill, about COVID, in figures 2 and 3 of my statement, my full statement, I've actually used the 2019 flow profile for the Auckland motorway because the 2020 flow profile was so different, and the only thing I could put it down to was COVID.
Yeah.
So continuing on paragraph 11, so I expect there will be peak spreading with travel across the bridge, which may result in a reduction in the peak hour traffic volumes identified from the Taupō traffic model and modelled by Ms. Sui. The other behaviour change that may occur, which is different to peak spreading, but results in a similar outcome, is that road users may choose to complete journeys by a travel mode that involves less delay than that associated with private motor vehicle use. As noted by Mr. Heath in his statement, people will consider the private cost of congestion when deciding on where they purchase a site or dwelling. While Mr. Heath has linked congestion-related property purchasing decisions to a choice between north and south of the bridge, it needs to be recognised that the road network to the south of the bridge is not congestion-free. Now, emphasising that I don't have expertise in property economics, the private cost of congestion could also be reduced by adopting the viable active modes of transport for travel to and from the site rather than relying on motor vehicle transport. Moving to walking and cycling, transport modelling does not typically provide us with a robust means to identify the impact of active modes. Therefore, transport modelling is typically motor vehicle focused. The distances from the site are such that children are unlikely to walk to school and adults are unlikely to walk to work. However, the site is well within the reach of numerous locations around the Taupō Central Business District and beyond when compared to the average cycle to work journey distance. Road users presented with the option of congested travel by private motor vehicle or free-flowing travel by active modes may choose to travel by active modes if the journey distance is practicable. Therefore, in order to encourage active mode use for travel to and from the site, it may be appropriate for some of the development contributions associated with the project to be directed towards improvements to the walking and cycling network between the site and Taupo CBD. Paragraph 18. Notwithstanding that a second river crossing will increase the capacity for vehicle movements across the river, it needs to be kept in mind that the existing bridge is not necessarily the primary constraint for traffic flows across the river. As noted in the evidence of Ms. Sui, the intersections on either side of the bridge control the rate at which traffic can reach the bridge. Moving on to paragraph 19. Based on the joint witness statement, I understand that Mr. Smith considers PC 37 should not proceed until such time as there is a second bridge crossing the Waikato River to provide relatively direct access to the Taupo town centre from areas of residential development on the northern side of the river. My opinion is that if residential development on the PC 37 site replaces some of the residential development at other locations on the northern side of the bridge, and the resultant total traffic volume at any given point on the transport network is the same for both cases, then the effects of PC 37 on the transport network will be no worse than neutral. If the extent of development on the northern side of the river is less than has been assumed for the 2030 modelling, then the 2030 travel times described in the joint witness statement will be overstated and present a conservative perspective. For example, if development is reduced to the extent indicated by Mr. Heath in his property economic statement, I expect there will be significant reductions in delay at the intersections and on the bridge. While delay won't be eliminated, the effective project traffic will be less than described in my statement. So moving to paragraph 22, I consider that the project presents benefits from a transport engineering perspective because the site is closer to established trip attractors and generators than other parcels of land on the northern side of the bridge. Therefore, from a whole of transport network perspective, I consider the project provides the opportunity for some residential related journey links to be minimised and for active mode use to be maximised. Turning to the bridge and the second river crossing, I consider that if there is to be any development to the north of the river, it should be development that promotes active modes and the use of public transport. The further any given development area is from the Taupo CBD as a trip attractor or generator, the less likely active modes will be adopted by road users. As demonstrated by Ms. Swee, the project is not the primary factor that results in low levels of service on the bridge and at nearby intersections. Motor vehicle trip generation associated with the project will exacerbate queuing and delay. However, because of its proximity to the CBD, the site presents an opportunity for reducing motor vehicle trip generation. The reduction is not solely attributable to mode shift from motor vehicles to active modes. As noted by Mr. Smith, the commercial development on the site is likely to reduce the volume of motor vehicle traffic beyond the boundaries of the Nukuhau area, and Mr. Heath touched this morning on that commercial development. Paragraph 25, an additional bridge will reduce queuing and delay associated with the constraint presented by Control Gates Bridge. Therefore, from the perspective of the project, I consider it would be beneficial for the second river crossing to be constructed. Moving to intersection form, and this is looking at new intersections. There isn't a perfect solution that provides a safe and efficient intersection form which accommodates all road users. However, taken as a whole, I consider that the signalised intersection form proposed for the Wairaki Drive, Poihipi Road, Hooker Falls Road intersection will be suitable to accommodate the traffic it is intended to serve. Notwithstanding that, irrespective of the intersection form to be constructed, I consider it important the intersection design is subject to the various stages of road safety audit. And that's a fairly standard condition to include in any case. Moving to walking and cycling, paragraph 27. Bike Taupo has raised concerns that, and I open quote, there does not appear to be any consideration of the impact of the increased levels of traffic on cycle safety, especially at the intersection of Norman Smith Street and Acacia Bay roads. This is not a cycle-friendly intersection, and the increased traffic load will make it less safe for cyclists, end quote. I acknowledge the concerns raised by Bike Taupo regarding the configuration of the Acacia Bay Norman Smith intersection from a cycling perspective. In my opinion, requiring cyclists to mix with motor vehicle traffic has resulted in an undesirable situation at the intersection. In his statement of evidence, Mr. Sapsford states, open quote, the proposed development is within a short bike ride to the CBD. However, the reality is that the lack of safe cycling infrastructure negates any proximity benefits, end quote. I agree with Mr. Sapsford regarding the lack of safe cycling infrastructure in the vicinity of the Acacia Bay Norman Smith intersection and along Norman Smith Street. However, cyclists travelling from the northwestern and northern portions of the site can travel to the Wairaki Drive Norman Smith Street intersection on relatively quiet suburban streets or off-road paths. Notwithstanding that, I agree it is desirable for improvements to be made to accommodate cyclists travelling from the southwestern portion of the site to the town centre. Therefore, it may be appropriate to defer development of the 8A17 portion of the site, which has been defined by Mr. Crawford. Moving to my conclusions, The project presents the potential for a reduction in the number of motor vehicle movements across the bridge between and including the Norman Smith Street intersection and the Spa Road roundabout. If project traffic is added to the traffic from other permitted development north of the bridge, the resultant delays have the potential to be significant. However, if the plan change is granted and trip generation by the site replaces trip generation that could occur from other locations, the effect will be neutral. If some of the motor vehicle trips that would otherwise be generated by the site can be replaced by active mode trips, there would be a reduction in the overall travel time. In my opinion, this is the key transport engineering advantage of the project compared with other development. Paragraph 31. If the overall trip generation is likely to otherwise increase as a result of the project, then the planners may be able to identify suitable development control mechanisms to ensure that the overall trip generation is kept to a level no greater than could occur based on existing permitted development. Now, paragraph 32, I've got a huge correction that I need to make. Partway along the first line, the letter A between is and less, if you take that out, the sentence just reads a whole lot better. So paragraph 32, if the extent of residential development is less than described in my statement, which Mr. Heath indicates is probable, the effects will also be less than has been described. Notwithstanding that, reduced levels of assumed development will not result in delay being eliminated. And just as a note to that, in retrospect, taking into account what Mr. Heath was talking about this morning, it appears that the modelling that has been presented to you so far is very conservative. Paragraph 33, if the site was a similar distance from the Taupō town centre as existing permitted development areas, I could not endorse the project because there are unlikely to be mitigating measures such that the project would generate less traffic than could be generated by the existing permitted development. However, because of its proximity to the town centre, I consider that the project has significant potential to reduce the traffic loading on the transport network through some trips being shifted from motor vehicles to active modes. I consider it reasonable to conclude that the number of shifted trips will be greater where the trip length is typical for active mode journeys than for those locations where the trip length is greater than typical. Mr. Hill, if I can just emphasise that paragraph 33, because from my perspective, I wouldn't have demonstrated any interest in being involved in this matter if Nukuhau was located somewhere else. For me, from a professional perspective, I think its location relative to the CBD is the key thing in its favour.
Yes, and I hadn't picked up the subtlety because I hadn't actually put things together of that 997 undeveloped vacant land or vacant permitted subdivisible land, which is a major part of your argument, of course, which, as I said, that was my fault. I hadn't picked that up.
And the 997 is actually less than the trip generation that's been assumed in some of the modelling undertaken by Ms. Sweet.
Yeah, no, I can see that. I can see that.
So is that actually individual lots or potential through subdivision?
We've identified it on a dwelling basis rather than lots.
So is this on rural land as well, or are you saying residentially zoned land?
So this is land that I understand is currently zoned residential. Some of it may not be developed, and Mr. Crawford may like to jump in and talk about an undeveloped half charges. But our understanding is that the lots that have been considered in the modelling that you've seen to date, done by Ms. Swee, is based on land that is presently zoned residential.
But I mean, even if we don't need to get hung up on the numbers, even if that number is only 500, in terms of Mr. Heath's argument, it's still, the quid pro quo is clearly in favour of the 140 rather than the 500.
I don't quite understand your statement there, sir.
Well, what I hear you saying, and yeah, let's get that corrected for a moment. There's 997 vacant, or whatever, call it 900 vacant residentially zoned lots at the moment that could be developed north of the bridge. Your argument, as I believe you putting it, is that with the 140 or the 200 or whatever it happens, whatever the number happens to be with respect to PC 37, significant amount of that demand is likely to come from those who might otherwise have developed the 900 lots elsewhere north of the bridge. I think
Yeah.
that's what you're saying, isn't it?
I'm saying that's one scenario, but you're taking me down a property and economics track, and I don't have expertise in that regard.
This is simply a numbers game, because, and that was why I asked the question earlier as to whether those 900s were part of the base calculation for the bridge traffic modelling.
They are part of the yeah. So the 997 is included in some of the modelling that Ms. Swee has done, but some of the modelling that she's done that you've seen to date has more than 997.
Yeah, well, it doesn't matter what the number is. If the argument is that many of those would choose to go to Nukuhau rather than further away because of active modes and closer to CBD and so on, then basically it's a transfer of the number from the traffic modelling from one place to another.
No.
You're saying no?
I'm saying no. And I actually sought clarification from Mr. Heath this morning after he'd finished presenting. From my communication with Mr. Heath, my understanding is that it would be 997 without Nukuhau and 1,137 with Nukuhau. So the 140 is additional to the 997.
So he's assumed, he hasn't assumed your argument.
No, he hasn't.
Okay, all right.
And in the modelling that I blindsided Mr. Muldowney with, we haven't assumed my argument either.
So you've modelled 1,200 or thereabouts, at least.
Yep. Yeah, as I say, it's 1,137.
Okay.
So paragraph 34. With regard to the points raised by submitters, I conclude that, firstly, I haven't identified anything associated with the project that is likely to preclude suitable intersections being designed. While construction of a second river crossing in advance of development of the site is likely to reduce congestion on Control Gates Bridge, the location of the site relative to the town centre also presents the potential to reduce congestion through some motor vehicle trips being transferred to active modes. Thirdly, detailed design of transport engineering elements of the site should be subject to road safety audit. Fourthly, congestion and delay along Norman Smith Street, Waireki Drive and Tongariro Street are likely to increase with or without the project. However, the project presents an opportunity for congestion and delay to be less than it might otherwise be without the project. And finally, existing infrastructure for walking and cycling should be improved to accommodate additional active mode traffic generated by the site. And at that point, I hand back to Mr. Muldowney and you, sir.
Sir, I wonder, can I just, before having questions from the committee, can I just see if I can lead the witness on just a little bit more evidence just relating to the memorandum that's been filed this afternoon, Mr. Swears, that one of 8 November that introduces the updated modelling that, that you've referred to. That's now been provided to the commissioners and it'll be circulating, but I just want to firstly get you to comment on that updated memorandum and explain to the commissioners the implications of that updated modelling. And when you explain the implications of the updated modelling from your perspective, can I also just get you to pick up on that final point that Commissioner Hill addresses, which is that this modelling doesn't assume any of that transfer of the 997. So it seems to me that in some ways the updated memorandum demonstrates that the previous modelling was quite conservative, but it's also the case that this memorandum has an element of conservatism built into it also, because it doesn't apply that sort of transfer of demand that Commissioner Hill was talking about. So over to you to express your views, but I just wanted you to cover off those points, please.
Well, if I can address the one about conservatism first, I think fairly conservative is a bit of an understatement. I think we were very conservative. The delays, so the incremental delays with the 140 lots, and I'll come back to your previous point, the incremental delays with the 140 lots in the worst case and I'm going from memory here, I think is 54 seconds for going through Spa Road Roundabout, Control Gates Bridge, and Norman Smith Street intersection. And so that's in the PM peak. So
just stop you there. So that's a 54-second delay through the corridor.
Through those three elements, yes.
Okay.
So that's going to be distributed. Some of it will be at Spa Road Roundabout, some of it could be at the bridge, and some at Norman Smith Street.
Yep.
Picking up on the other point, we've assumed no transfer of that 140 lots into, no transfer of the 997 dwellings into the 140. So Ms. Swee has done two modelling runs, one with 997 dwellings with nothing from the site, and the other one with 997 plus 140. So assuming that you've got the full 997 from existing plus a full 140 from the site. So yes, if some of the 140 are transferred from the other locations, then once again, yes, it is conservative.
But if I can just ask a question in there too, but you haven't run a model that has taken any advice as to what the likelihood over a period of time for those 997 are to be taken up. You haven't ground truthed that 997.
Well, that's been based, the 997 is based on work undertaken by Mr. Crawford and Mr. Heath. So it would probably be best that the questions regarding that posed to them.
But I don't think Mr. Heath told us when he expected those 997 to actually come online.
My understanding is that it's over a 10-year time frame, so 9 years through to 2030.
All right. So so the assumption, Mr. Crawford, you can confirm that too. The assumption is that by 2031 or 32, one or the other, those 997 would have been taken up, and we'll have an extra 140 if this was approved. Yep.
Yeah, look, thank you for the opportunity. I don't want to bamboozle the commissioners with the numbers. What we can say right now is that in the Taupō area, there's something like 4,300 sections that are developable. So that's a mixture of current lots that are vacant and current future lots that haven't yet been developed. When we take some of the data from Roger Stokes, development engineer at council, he's shown us how many lots have been developed each year through back for many years. And so what that tells us, because we know that the builders are flat out and the plumbers are flat out, they can't build houses any quicker. And so allowing a bit of a step each year that we will be able to add to those services, we're able to identify how many additional houses might be built. And we know we've got the split of those houses south of the bridge, 2,700, and north of the bridge, 1,600. So if we apply the rate of what we know that the houses can be built due to the builders being, working to their capacity, and I've run this past property economics, and I think it's a sound reasoning, is that we can identify each year how many houses might be built south of the bridge and how many might be built north of the bridge. So north of the bridge without Nukuhau, up until 2025, is about 452. If you, from 2026 to 2030, north of the bridge, there'd be an additional 546. That's where the 997 lots comes from. Not to say that after 2030 there won't be more houses that can be built north of the bridge, because there can be and there will be. What we're arguing is that, or suggesting is that, there's simply not enough builders around to build those houses. So where property economics came along is that they've said, I believe Mr. Heath, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that through until 2030, with the addition of Nukuhau coming online, there would be the addition of those, was it 140 houses? So, and I guess 2030 is when we're identifying that the second bridge would likely be online, if not earlier.
Yeah. So what's your metric, your annual capacity to build? What's that metric?
so we've assumed a 2% rate of building growth in the Taupō township. So in 2021, we're anticipating about 255 new dwellings and 2% growth.
2% compounding on that.
Correct, yeah.
Right, okay. That wasn't too hard, was it?
As long as I haven't lost you, yeah. I'm looking at a spreadsheet, which makes it slightly easier. But.
Can I just clarify that piece of evidence, please? That 255 per annum that you've described, that's across Taupo. You've still got to apply the north-south split to it, don't you?
Split to that, yeah.
Yeah, and so the rationale is that we've identified if there's 2/3 houses south of the bridge and 1/3 north of the bridge, that the building would follow that.
Thank you.
Right. So it's actually 2.5 to 1 on that basis, but that's fine.
Sure.
Yeah. All right.
Yep.
Back to you, Mr. Swears. You're, if you remember where you were.
I think I got through Mr. Muldowney's list, and unless you'd like to correct me.
I think you have. So
Yeah.
I'm grateful for that, Commissioner Hill. Over to you with the
Right.
witness.
Thank you, and look forward to the memo. It hadn't come through a moment ago, but as you say, it must be on its way. Dale, questions?
Yeah, if I can just ask Mr. Swears to go back to paragraph 29, just to help me understand, please, some comments around, I guess, response to the bike taupō issue. And you at the last sentence there, are you with me, Mr. Swears?
Yep.
So therefore you talk about deferring development and as defined by Mr. Crawford. So I'm a bit confused by that. Is that a reference to something in Mr. Crawford's evidence? Are you saying a deferral of the bike access way, or are you referring to a deferral of that land, those land parcels?
I'm talking about a deferral of development of those land parcels. So
purely over cycling impacts, cycling infrastructure safety.
Essentially, yes. Because if the project is going to realise benefits from an active modes perspective, but we don't have the cycling infrastructure to support that, then I would be uncomfortable about active mode journeys being encouraged and people being encouraged to use infrastructure that I don't think is in a desirable form at present.
So given that we have a sort of an arterial route or a secondary collector proposed through that sort of, I'm looking at the picture now, and this is where we suffer from not all being in the room together. I'm just sort of a bit of a loss to understand why you would be suggesting that area. Is that because it principally feeds into Lakewood Drive?
Exactly. So it feeds into Lakewood Drive, which then feeds you into the Norman Smith Acacia Bay intersection, and you have to use Norman Smith to get to the signals.
So you're saying that all those other areas south of that blue line don't go into Lakewood Drive as well on properties other than those blocks?
No, I don't have your blue line in front of me.
So it's showed as a secondary collector. Maybe that's something we can pick up on, but I was just trying to figure out why it was that area in particular, when I thought it was about the idea of traffic flow, cyclist flow into that problematic intersection as suggested by Bike Taupō's submission, I guess.
Do you have access to my full statement of evidence?
Yep.
So if you can go to figure 5 of that.
Yep, I had that in front of me with the brown line.
Yep.
Yeah, and I guess I was surprised because I thought you were talking about the cycle access, not actually the whole, that whole portion of land south of the...
Essentially what I'm saying, linking my paragraph 29 to that figure 5. Yeah. So I'm suggesting that areas that would require the brown line to get down to the signals could be deferred, or possibly should be deferred, until there is active mode infrastructure to support them. But the areas that would use the purple line and the green line, they could proceed because you can get down to the signals without having to go along Norman Smith Street and without having to use the Acacia Bay Norman Smith Street intersection.
Okay, so what's your cross-reference to Mr. Crawford's evidence in that paragraph refer to then? please?
I don't have a cross-reference. It's just Mr. Crawford was describing the different components of the whole development.
Sorry, my board books has decided to tap out. Carry on, Chair.
Yep. Okay. Kevin, have questions for Mr. Swears?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Robert, long time no see.
I reckon. Thank you. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Look, just so I'm clear, I'm picking up bits and pieces from your answers to questions and your evidence in chief to us. Just so I'm crystal clear in my mind, the benefits that would accrue from mode change to more active modes, is that predicated on cycling infrastructure being in place beforehand or concurrent with this development?
I think you've got some infrastructure there already that can be used. So going back to that figure 5, the purple route and the green route.
I've got it in front of me now. Yeah.
So there's infrastructure there that can be used now. I think some of that infrastructure needs to be tidied up. So you've got the link from Woodward Drive through to the signals. I think for that to be used as a regular cycle route, it would be desirable to widen that to a shared path. And there's also some potential for some septet improvements, so crime prevention through environmental design improvements. So with those two routes, I think some minor refinements are needed, but I think essentially they could be used now. With the brown route, that's the one I'm uncomfortable with.
Which is arguably the principal route into that intersection, just with Wairake Drive, yeah?
That's right, because you have to use the Norman Smith Acacia Bay intersection and going along Norman Smith Street.
Okay. One other question, I'm trying to phrase this. You're aware of the changes occurring right now with Tongariro Street?
I have been made aware of them. I don't have details of them, though.
Okay, dropping from 2 lanes each way to a single lane each way. Does that, or is that likely to impact on the modelling that you've done, given that everything still comes through Control Gates Bridge? Potentially changes the dynamics at the roundabout. I don't have the technical details of the quantum of those changes, but given that that is a significant change within traffic movements around town, are you able to comment on the likely impact on the downstream effects?
Mr. Smith would probably be best placed to answer that. As the road network changes, the routes that people use will change. So if, for example, with Tongariro Street, you take the capacity down to 1 lane northbound, that's going to mean there's longer queuing on Tongariro Street for the same amount of traffic, which then means that you might end up with peak spreading as people attempt to avoid that queuing, or it could mean that some of that traffic transfers onto Spa Road, which will then affect the amount of traffic coming westbound to the Spa Road intersection. Ms. Swee may be able to help in this regard, but my understanding is that the Taupō traffic model is based on the network configuration as it stands today.
Okay, just so I'm clear in my mind, peak spreading is entirely dependent on behavioural change of those using the network, which can be brought about by what you'd loosely call a forcing function. In other words, if it ain't there, you can't use it.
Essentially, I mean, if for example, if I travel to work at 8 o'clock in the morning and it's going to take me 15 minutes, but if I leave at 7:45 in the morning, it might take me 10 minutes. I might choose to leave at 7:45 just so I can get to work faster, because that's really where I want to be.
Yep. Thank you.
The one problem, that's a time-based response, certainly. You don't have a rat run option here, do you? No,
you don't.
That's the kicker. Yeah. Okay.
Well, you do have a rat run, but it's certainly not one that I would be promoting, because your rat run is a lot longer route going through to the East Taupō arterial and coming in the other way. Right. But I'm not promoting that.
No.
So if I could just jump in again there, David, I guess my comment there is if we're dependent upon behavioural change and attitudinal change of people using the network, which to my mind seems somewhat problematic, but yeah, I'll leave it there.
Just got one thing to say, COP26. Yeah, right. Yes. Right. Well, thank you, Mr. Swears. That's
Thank you.
and Ms. Swee. That's helpful, and we're obviously going to hear back from Mr. Smith amongst others later on. So, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Hill.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So we're now on to Ms. Cleary, the planning witness for the applicants. So Ms. Cleary has produced a comprehensive statement of evidence dated the 20th of October and also produced a summary statement. So I can see you there, Ms. Cleary. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Great. Same here. We can see and hear you. So firstly, can I just get you to confirm the content of your statement of evidence dated the 20th of October?
Yes, I confirm that.
Thank you. And then you have produced a document dated the 5th of November, which is a summary statement of your primary evidence, and it also incorporates some matters in reply. Do you have that in front of you?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Great. Okay. So if I could just ask you to read from that document, I think probably commencing at paragraph 6, please.
Yes, great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Starting at paragraph 6 of my summary of evidence, Plan Change 37 will rezone approximately 78 hectares from rural environment to general residential environment, medium residential environment in the Taupō District Plan. Plan Change 37 will introduce the Nukuhau structure plan into the Taupō District Plan, and my statement of evidence dated 20th October contained an amended version of the structure plan, which was included as attachment 1 to that statement of evidence. Plan Change 37 also amends the residential environment objectives, policies and rules of the Taupō District Plan, and further details of Plan Change 37 are discussed in my full statement of evidence. The Nukuhau structure plan area relates to the future residential growth area identified on map 1, northern growth areas of Taupō District Council's growth management strategy, Taupō District 2050. And I just note that map 1 from TD 2050 is attachment 6 to my 20th October statement of evidence. Policy 3E212 of the Taupō District Plan identifies the importance of ensuring a pattern of urban development that is consistent with the identified urban growth areas, and the Nukuhau structure plan will give effect to that outcome. The Nukuhau structure plan also gives effect to policy 6.11.2 of the Waikato Regional Policy Statement, which requires that patterns of future development are consistent with the strategic directions of TD 2050. And I note that attachment 5 to my statement of evidence cites policy 6.11 of the regional policy statement, as well as other particularly relevant provisions of the policy statement. In my statement of evidence, I evaluate whether Plan Change 37 will give effect to the National Policy Statement Urban Development. And I would refer you there to paragraphs 79 to 99 in table 1 of my statement of evidence of the 20th of October. So to just summarise that evaluation, I note Plan Change 37 will give effect to Objective 1 and Policy 1 of the NPSUD in relation to a well-functioning urban environment, as it will meet the needs in terms of price, location and type, price and location of different households. In particular, the medium density areas of the structure plan will enable a variety of housing types. It will have good accessibility for people between housing, jobs, community services, natural spaces and open spaces, including by way of public or active transport. Will provide positive effects in relation to greenhouse gas emissions due to the proximity of the Nukuhau structure plan area to Taupo CBD. It will support achievement of a compact urban form, with the Nukuhau structure plan being situated adjoining the existing urban area. And this location, the proximity to Taupō CBD and the mix of residential, local shops and extensive reserves will minimise the need for private motor vehicle use, encourage walking, cycling and multimodal transport connections, and maximise the opportunities for people to live, work and play within their local area. Objective 4 of the NPSUD requires that recognition is given to the fact that urban environments, including amenity values, will develop and change over time in response to the needs of people and communities. And Plan Change 7 will contribute to meeting the need for housing choice, and any change in travel times that it causes might be seen as a sort of change in the amenity values of urban environments that Objective 4 recognises. Plan Change 37 will give effect to Objective 6 of the NPSUD relating to being responsive to proposals that would supply significant development capacity by adding significant development capacity. Another important element of both the NPSUD and the Waikato Regional Policy Statement, including in 6A development principles, is the strong direction of seeking to ensure that planning for urban development growth is coordinated with infrastructure provision. I rely on Mr. Swee's and Ms. Swee's evidence in identifying that there will be traffic delays affecting the Control Gates Bridge and its vicinity as a result of growth that will take place in Taupo, north of the Waikato River. It's less clear, as discussed in Ms. Swee's and Mr. Swee's evidence, that approving Plan Change 7 will worsen those delays, and you've just heard from Mr. Swee's about this due to potential peak spreading, shift to active modes, and if Plan Change 37 does not increase the demand for housing and is therefore neutral in terms of traffic generation, which Mr. Sweets has explained that line of argument to you. However, while there's some uncertainty of the significance of the traffic effects of Plan Change 37, the modelling of the traffic effects does identify traffic delay effects. Therefore, I have to agree with Mr. Bonus that those effects may mean that Plan Change 37 needs to be modified to ensure that the effects are appropriately avoided, remedied or mitigated. Modifications will also ensure that Plan Change 37 gives effects to the objectives and policies of the Regional Policy Statement relating to ensuring land users do not adversely affect the efficient and effective functioning of infrastructure and regionally significant infrastructure. Mr. Bonus recommends a rule that any subdivision within the Nukuhau structure plan area prior to the provision of additional capacity at the Control Gates Bridge beyond that supplied in October 2021 is a non-complying activity. I do not agree that development of the structure plan should essentially hinge on the provision of additional capacity at the Control Gates Bridge, which is what the non-complying activity rule recommended by Mr. Bonus appears to suggest. I consider the more appropriate mechanism as a discretionary activity resource consent application for subdivision with a requirement that an integrated transport assessment addresses the traffic effects, amongst other matters usual in ITA. And I just would comment here, picking up on the Chair's point made earlier today, I would say that the matters that need to be addressed at the time of resource consent can all be identified, and this does mean that a restricted discretionary activity status could also be an effective approach. I'd also note that the joint witness statement identified that there should be an analysis of traffic impacts for resource consent applications relating to the plan change site, and that does point to the need for traffic effects to be assessed at the time of resource consent. The Section 42A report identifies that there are other matters in relation to the Regional Policy Statement 6A development principles to be addressed, and notes that not that such values represent an insurmountable hurdle to the request. Those matters relate to J, maintaining or enhancing landscape values and providing for the protection of historic and cultural heritage, and Q, consider effects on the unique tangata whenua relationships with respect to an area. The Section 42A report also says there are residual issues in determining cultural and archaeological values associated with Plan Change 37. The Section 42A report suggests that the panel needs to consider whether the applicant is engaged with appropriate mana whenua. Mr. Crawford has explained the engagement that him and his colleagues carried out with iwi authorities in Hapu. In my opinion, engagement with tangata whenua is important to understand and identify potential cultural effects and to ensure that the RMA requirements of Part 2, Section 6E, 6F and 7A of the RMA are met. The engagement with iwi authorities in Hapu has not identified any cultural effects that would either preclude urbanisation or, it seems, require measures to avoid, remedy or mitigate effects on cultural values. However, I acknowledge that without a cultural impact assessment confirming this to be the case, then the matter may need to be addressed further. I'm of the opinion that this can be achieved before subdivision and development proceeds through the requirement for a cultural impact assessment of the Nukuhau structure plan area to be prepared and provided to Taupō District Council. Given that TDC prepared the TD 2050 and identified the Nukuhau area as a growth area following a consultation and engagement process, I consider the suitability of the area for urbanisation has already been determined. I also note that there are no submissions from iwi authorities to Plan Change 37. The structure plan processes to determine the form of development and cultural values need to be better understood and addressed in the form of the subdivision and the development of the area. Therefore, I propose an amendment to Plan Change 37 to require the provision of a cultural impact assessment with subdivision applications. And here I just I just note the evidence of Mr. Kusab's, which was provided to me today, which I've read, appears to suggest that the requirement for a cultural impact assessment isn't necessarily one that the owners of the Rangatira Ehe Trust land shares. So I'd like to signal that my opinion about the need for a cultural impact assessment may change once I've heard the evidence of the submitters. The requirement for a cultural impact assessment is a method of addressing any concern that cultural effects have not been fully assessed. And it does seem that the picture emerging from the evidence of submitters is that it may not be seen as necessary by the submitters. Requiring a cultural impact assessment at the time of subdivision would be taking a precautionary approach that would be justified if there appears to be gaps in the assessment of cultural effects. So I've proposed a number of other amendments to Plan Change 37 in my statement of evidence to address issues raised by submitters, and I refer the panel to those. So before concluding my summary evidence, I'd also like to address certain matters raised in the evidence of submitters. So the submissions I'd like to address are those by Heritage New Zealand, Rangatira Blocks 8A 17 Trust, Rangatira E Trust and the Waikato Regional Council. I address the planning matters raised in those statements of evidence, and in preparing this response I rely on the expert evidence prepared by other witnesses for the applicant. So Heritage New Zealand, Ms. Karen McAley has provided evidence on behalf of Heritage New Zealand. Ms. McAley explains that the Heritage New Zealand submission sought an archaeological assessment and a cultural impact assessment. WSP's archaeologist, Ms. Kusi Sykes, prepared an archaeological assessment, and some additional work has been requested by Heritage New Zealand and recommended by Ms. Walters, the Section 42A report archaeologist, to supplement this. And this is being discussed in Ms. Sykes' statement of evidence and reply evidence of submitters. Ms. McAley relies on the conclusion of Ms. Walter that it's not currently possible to make an accurate determination as to whether Plan Change 37 will have an adverse effect on historic heritage. The Section 42A report discusses this matter as being one of seeking additional information of the archaeological assessment methodology and identifies that the issue is a lack of information, not that such values represent an insurmountable hurdle to the request. Ms. Sykes sets out in her reply statement extensive information relating to the in-depth archaeological assessment she's carried out. In my opinion, the archaeological work done to date does not identify any risk of adverse effects on historic heritage, including archaeological sites, that either require delay in determining whether Plan Change 37 can be approved, or a determination that Plan Change 37 needs to be amended in some way in order to ensure recognition and protection of historic heritage. To the extent that further archaeological assessment work is necessary, the requirement that I've recommended for a cultural impact assessment, together with the proposed subdivision assessment criteria, will ensure this occurs. And I would just pause there to comment on the Chair's suggestion, perhaps of a indicative notation on the structure plan to identify the location of the two depressions. I agree that that's an entirely possible mechanism if a precautionary approach needs to be taken in relation to those two sites. I do understand that an exploratory authority is being sought, and once that exploration has taken place to determine if the depressions are archaeological sites or not, then obviously some modification of the sites will have taken place. I discussed the matter of
excuse me, I'm sorry. I just Chair, what's our best approach here, given we've got a lot of meaty evidence in terms of the questioning, whether we're waiting till the end or because we're sort of covering a lot of ground and we need a break?
I'm quite comfortable if you want a question as we go through.
Yeah. Is it?
I
know it's not usual. It's just that there's a whole lot of stuff and really, meaty information in your evidence, Ms. Cleary, and I just wasn't sure whether to pile on at the end or go as we go.
Oh, I'm perfectly happy to take questions as I move through.
Okay, and how does that work in terms of the break, Chair?
Well, you just carry on and we'll have a break when we get to a point.
Okay, all right. Well, I guess I just, I'm interested to hear this cultural impact assessment or requirement of it. Can I just ask you to, is there an option for a mechanism to require it just in one go as a sort of a more integrated approach rather than a piecemeal per subdivision type approach? Can you comment on whether that's a plausible mechanism, please?
Yes, yes, I can comment on that. So my full statement of evidence dated the 20th of October, where I discuss and recommend a cultural impact assessment, I do suggest that the provision to go into the plan change does include the statement that it's expected that there would be a single cultural impact assessment prepared for the entire structure plan area, and that would then be the document that any subsequent applications for subdivision are assessed against.
And so what would that look like in practice? Where would that sit as a requirement, I guess, is what I'm asking?
Well, it would be built into the rule if a rule did get included to require as an information requirement and as a matter for assessment criteria for subdivision. It would be built into that. Yes. Yeah. So yeah,
that's where I'm confused. Sorry, is am I correct in hearing that you're saying you support the idea of one CIA to cover the plan change area in its entirety, and that would then inform subdivision, but I'm also hearing that you're saying subdivision would trigger it. I'm trying to figure out if there's a way to do it up front rather than in a piecemeal per subdivision way, because that doesn't seem to be a very efficient way.
What I have suggested is that the first subdivision application would be the trigger for requiring a cultural impact assessment to be provided, as part of the assessment of effects for that first subdivision application. But I've also suggested that that first application, the cultural impact assessment, needs to be for the entire structure plan area and not just for the part of the structure plan that that particular application happens to relate to. So I have written provisions that set that out in my full statement of evidence. But as to whether there's a mechanism to require a cultural impact assessment ahead of any application for subdivision, that's not something that I've turned my mind to, and I haven't drafted anything that would attempt to achieve that. So I would need to give that some thought in terms of what the mechanisms might be for that. But I suppose what I've been signalling, and when I paused and added some comment on my summary statement, is that I am finding that the evidence from Mr. Kusabs in relation to the Rangatira Trust land, where he very plainly states that he doesn't believe that a cultural impact assessment is necessary for that block of land. That does give me cause to think that potentially a cultural impact assessment certainly for the entire structure plan area may not actually be necessary. So I've suggested that perhaps the hearing panel considers that once you've heard from submitters. So there are some submitters who are broadly raising questions in terms of the consultation, and so I think that's probably something for the hearings panel to turn their minds to when you hear that evidence, and I'll certainly be reflecting in terms of my professional opinion in terms of whether I recommend a cultural impact assessment is necessary, because of course the RMA requires that cultural effects are assessed. So a cultural impact assessment is a tool to achieve that, and not having a cultural impact assessment doesn't remove the obligation for an applicant to consider cultural effects.
If I could jump in there, and referring to your primary evidence statement at paragraph 32, you talk about the need for consultation and engagement for private plan change rests with the local authority. So can you just expand on that? Are you suggesting that it would be the local authority should do this, or that would rest with the private plan change proponents?
So that comment is in relation to the section 42A reporting officer raising a question as to whether the applicant has consulted with mana whenua, and I'm just, it's a statement of fact that under the RMA, an applicant for a private plan change and also for a resource consent application, there's no obligation, there's no requirement under the RMA to consult with anybody. The obligation to engage with mana whenua sits with the territorial authority. So that's simply the point that I'm making, that in this case the applicant has engaged with mana whenua, but the fact that that engagement has happened doesn't change the fact that the RMA doesn't require the applicant to have done that. And if there's any issue as to whether adequate consultation has taken place, I'm simply advising the hearings panel that there is no statutory requirement under the RMA for the applicant to have done consultation. The only statutory requirement for consultation or engagement in the RMA puts that obligation on the council to do that.
Thank you.
Dale, you following up? No? All right.
So
Actually, sorry, maybe I just press the point. Given, and so I can't put my finger on it exactly here, where there was a comment there where was it Mr. Kusabs or might have been Mr. McLaughlin has said there is no need for a cultural impact assessment. In fact, to do so would be insulting. And I apologise, I can't just put my finger exactly on where I read that now. That being the case, and yes, there's no obligation, I get that under the RMA, but it's advisable to do it all nonetheless.
Yes, I did say that, yes.
And given that response, can you suggest a way forward that, no, we don't want one, but yes, it would be a good idea to have one, and what would be a more appropriate way, not to insult anybody, but to cover off all contingencies there?
Sure. Well, as I commented, the requirements for a resource consent application, and indeed for a private plan change application, that the cultural effects are assessed. So the issue of engagement or commissioning of cultural impact assessments are really just, they're both different mechanisms to come to the point of having ascertained if there are any cultural values, and to identify the means of ensuring that those cultural values are appropriately addressed in either the plan change or subsequently in a resource consent application. So I think if mana whenua, if parts of the area, of the structure plan area are already being identified as there are no significant cultural values that require measures within either the plan change or at the next stage at the time of subdivision, then requiring a cultural impact assessment is probably going too far. So I mentioned that there's still an obligation on an applicant for a resource consent application to identify any effects on cultural values, just as part and parcel of the entire assessment of environmental effects. So I think if you're of a mind to not include build a rule into the Plan Change 37 to require a cultural impact assessment, I think there's already sufficient measures in the plan change. It does actually have assessment criteria pointing to the need for cultural values to be assessed at the time of the application.
Yeah, thank you for that. I guess what I'm getting at is we're hearing in some of the submissions we've had, no need for a cultural impact assessment. It would be advisable to have one. The RMA does not mandate it, but says it's a good idea. My concern is that we get to the end of the process and someone stands up and says, you didn't talk to us. You didn't consult. You haven't considered the cultural impacts, and they come out of left field. I don't want to be demeaning in saying that, but I just want to make sure that the approach is fully inclusive, really.
Sure. Yes, well, that was initially, that was my starting point when I wrote my evidence, and for the 20th of October was, I did share a concern that perhaps there were parties that were emerging and through the submission process, but I think Mr. Coushabs has identified, certainly in relation to the Trust's land, that a cultural impact assessment isn't necessary, and I think the panel probably needs to just take a careful look at what Mr. Crawford has said in both his full statement of evidence and his summary statement of evidence, which sets out in a very detailed way the consultation and the engagement with both iwi authorities and hapu. So certainly the marae that he's been in touch with have either said we have no comment at this time or haven't actually provided anything in response to Mr. Crawford. And I think all of that together with the history of the identification of the area, the Nukuhau area as a growth area, it does seem to me that there's a fairly low risk of there being cultural values that no one is aware of and no one's been telling the applicant. So the responses that Mr. Crawford had from the iwi authorities were pretty limited, just in relation to he's explained this already, but just to reiterate, and in terms of impacts of stormwater on Lake Taupō, and in terms of the provision of adequate wastewater servicing for the site. So yes, I think they're probably the things to turn your mind to in terms of reaching a view in terms of both the consultation that's taking place and also the need or not for a cultural impact assessment.
Thank you. I appreciate your answer to that.
Yep. Thank you for that. And I have not a skerrick of doubt that Mr. Muldowney will address us on that matter when it comes to replies, so, as I would expect council to as well. So, yep. Dale, were you looking for a break at this point, were you? Yeah. I thought I was picking that up.
I can confirm that, David, yes.
Right, okay. We'll take an 11-minute break till 15:15. I'm aware that we're now impinging into hoped for submitter time, but let's not worry too much about that. Sorry, submitters. I'm aware that Regional Council has popped in and popped out of the network here, but we will be with you as soon as we close with Ms. Cleary. So let's take what is now a 10-minute break and be back at 15:15. Thank you. Right. Okay, we're back. Thank you. Right, Ms. Cleary, we're back with you. And we just check with my commissioners. Have you any questions to follow up before we let Ms. Cleary continue?
Nothing more from me. Thank you, David.
Yeah.
Please carry on. Thank you.
Righto. Right, you were about to take us through. Well, where were you going to take us next, Ms. Cleary?
I'll start again at paragraph 25.
Right, thank you.
So Rangatira blocks 8A 17 trusts.
Yeah.
Mr. Greaves has provided planning evidence for the Rangatira 8A 17 trusts and notes these submissions were generally in support of Plan Change 37, with the proposed zoning generally aligning with the long-term development aspirations of the trust. Mr. Greaves notes that an appropriately drafted discretionary activity or non-complying activity rule with a supporting policy framework are equally effective at managing resource consent applications, depending on where the commissioners land with regard to the scale of effect. I agree with Mr. Greaves that a non-complying activity status would suggest that there is potential for more significant adverse effects than a discretionary activity status would signal. In my view, a non-complying status would be wrongly signalling substantial adverse effects for any scale of subdivision and development of the Nukuhau structure plan. As Mr. Greaves suggests, based on the expert evidence of Mr. Swears and Ms. Shui, I'm of the view that some initial scale of subdivision and development will likely be able to take place without significant adverse traffic effects. The discretionary activity resource consent application process will enable that determination to take place. And as I've noted earlier, a restricted discretionary activity would also enable that determination of traffic effects to take place. Mr. Greaves states that my evidence identifies that the plan change could be amended to enable part but not full urbanisation within the plan change area prior to the second bridge crossing being constructed. To be clear, my evidence and the amendments I have proposed do not suggest that the rezoning of the Nukuhau structure plan to urban zoning should be delayed until there's a second bridge crossing. As Mr. Swears' evidence points out, the potential for peak spreading, mode shift and other factors may mean the traffic effects of some as yet determined scale of development will not create significant traffic effects. To further clarify, I also do not agree with Mr. Bonus's suggested rule 4A75 that any subdivision is a non-complying activity prior to the provision of additional capacity at the Control Gates Bridge beyond that supplied in October 2021. This rule is problematic in a number of respects, including that it is silent as to what the activity status subdivision would have after additional capacity has been provided. And because of the congestion and traffic delays identified in Ms. Swee's statement of evidence relate to the roads in the vicinity of the bridge rather than the bridge itself. I agree with Mr. Greaves that there is no evidence to support the promotion of development on one specific piece of land over any other. In my opinion, if development of a structure plan needs to be staged due to factors such as limited capacity of infrastructure, then it is preferable that the logical sequencing of stages of development is identified within the structure plan to ensure coordination with the provision of infrastructure. As Mr. Greaves says, there is no evidence to support staging of the Nukuhau structure plan. So turning now to Rangatira E Trust, Mr. Farquhar has provided planning evidence on behalf of Rangatira E Trust, who have substantial land holdings to the west and north of the Plan Change 37 area. Mr. Farquhar states Rangatira E Trust have had ongoing discussions with council staff about developing the land and explains that the long-term 100-year plus future of this locality is what Rangatira E focuses. In my opinion, Plan Change 37 does not affect the ability for Rangatira E to seek an urban zoning and to develop their land. Mr. Farquhar says that Plan Change 37 should be declined until a district-wide review is commenced. I do not agree because Plan Change 37 is consistent with the enabling of private plan change requests that the RMA provides under the provisions of Part 2 of Schedule 1 of the RMA. Mr. Farquhar provides the opinion that Plan Change 37 should be declined or deferred until a wider growth management strategies are considered. I do not agree. Taupō District Council carried out a growth management strategy in 2018 to produce TD 2050, and I understand that TDC's consultation with the Rangatira E Trust resulted in the Rangatira E Trust land being removed as an identified growth area. TD 2050 does not identify the Rangatira E Trust land as an area for future growth. So turning now to the Waikato Regional Council, the evidence of Ms. Craven for Waikato Regional Council strongly supports the amendments that are set out in my statement of evidence. The applicant accepts that the gullies are at risk of scouring and erosion and fully understands the need for careful management of the risks to the gullies. The amendments that the applicant has proposed appear to go a long way to satisfying the matters of concern to the Regional Council. However, Ms. Craven suggests that further amendments are needed to fully address the Regional Council's submission, and these are set out in Appendix 1 to her evidence. Ms. Craven's evidence seeks that the Nukuhau structure plan be modified to illustrate the main gully system in its existing form and to change the legend from proposed stormwater reserve to natural gully system. The applicant is willing to agree to these amendments to the structure plan, and I provide a revised structure plan that reflects these amendments as attachment 1 to this statement. Ms. Craven's suggested amendments include that wherever the term gullies is used in the policy rules and criteria of Plan Change 37, that this be amended to refer to natural gully. As noted in my statement of evidence, the term natural gully is not defined in the regional policy statement or in any Regional Council technical guidelines, and that should be Mr. Bird. And Mr. Bird has noted that the gullies are in many cases already modified and therefore could not be considered to be natural. Labelling the main gully that is shown on the structure plan as natural gully system may assist in clarifying that these are the gullies that are referred to in policy 3A234, 4A72, 4A77 and 4A817L, all which relate to landscape planting, walking and cycle network and stormwater. In my view, amending the reference to gullies in the provisions I have noted to refer instead to the natural gully system identified in the Nukuhau structure plan would assist in clarification and address the concern of the Regional Council. The request by the Regional Council for reference to the WRC Stormwater Management Guideline and WRC Erosion and Sediment Control Guidelines for soil disturbing activities was noted in my statement of evidence as unnecessary, as they apply whether stated in the Nukuhau provisions or not. However, the applicant is willing to agree to those inclusions with some minor modification to omit the requested wording to ensure that the stormwater is treated on site to control the use of existing natural gully systems and stormwater reserves. And I just note that Mr. Bird did go through this matter in his statement he made to you earlier. So as Mr. Bird discusses in his reply to submitted evidence, the wording proposed by Ms. Craven suggests a blanket no modification, whereas Mr. Bird considers this should be a matter that is determined through the appropriate resource consent assessment. To address the revisions sought in the Regional Council evidence, the applicant can agree to additional amendments. And with your leave, Mr. Chair, I won't read those all out to you. I'm happy to take questions on them.
That's fine. We'll hear from Regional Council in a minute as to whether or not they accept what you're proposing or not.
Yes, yes. So just in conclusion, and in my opinion, with the amendments that I've proposed, Plan Change 37 will meet all the statutory tests and give effect to the National Policy Statement, Urban Development and the Regional Policy Statement. It is the most appropriate way of achieving the objectives of the Taupō District Plan, and in combination with the new objectives that it introduces, it is the most appropriate way of achieving the first purpose of the RMA. Accordingly, I recommend that Plan Change 37 with the amendments set out in attachment 2 to my statement of evidence and with the additions of the above noted amendments be approved.
Thank you for that. Now, I'm not proposing that we go through the provisions per se at this point. I think we'll do that tomorrow as part and parcel of reply or prior to reply, I think would be the more efficient way of doing it once we've heard from submitters and maybe have firmed up some ideas of our own. I just want to check with you, Mr. Muldowney, that you're okay about us working that way.
Yes, so that's perfectly fine. So if I understand you right, through the reply tomorrow, if there are some solutions that we've worked up overnight to some of those drafting issues, we can address you on those at that time.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And I mean, it may well be that we need to fold over a session for Wednesday or something. I mean, let's just see how we go with respect to that. So just, are there any round sort of questions left for Ms. Cleary? Dale?
I guess this might be better off leaving until later on in the process, but I'm going to go there anyway. Yep. In terms of these natural gullies, are you suggesting then, Ms. Cleary, that's limited to those shown on the structure plan at the moment, the revised one attached to your evidence? So excludes other gullies that have been discussed today?
Yes, that is what I'm suggesting, yes.
But that wouldn't necessarily exclude other areas from being a part of a future gully management plan, or would it? I guess I'm trying to figure out the interplay between the request for a gully management plan as opposed to the annotation on the plans, which talks about a natural gully system. They're not necessarily the same thing, are they?
No, not at all. No. So my understanding of, and perhaps it's a question that the regional council might answer more readily in terms of what they had in mind with the gully management plan. But my understanding is that the concerns are primarily with erosion and also flood hazard in relation to the gullies, and that it's the main gully that is of the chief concern. But that's not to say, I think, that there aren't concerns in terms of how all gullies are treated in subsequent subdivision resource consent applications. But obviously, to modify any gully needs resource consent.
Yeah, and I guess I'm wondering about how this is managed in a more of a systems type way than a piecemeal. I've sort of been going on about this because I'm trying to get my head around how this would work in practice to ensure that that does work effectively, because it's obviously quite a big issue with this plan change. That is there a mechanism for requiring a gully management plan for the plan change area in its entirety, or are you saying you prefer it to go at a consents level, effectively kicking it down the road to that level?
Sure.
Or are you aware of some kind of mechanism that means that we could be quite clear up front? And I guess what I'm getting at is, you know, obviously we're not going to control, we're not talking about stages, I don't think. We talked about it a little bit this morning. But, you know, how do we ensure that this is going to work effectively, given that we're not controlling who goes first? And whether that in practice means some kind of voluntary plan that all landowners sign up to, or is the long-term aspiration that those areas are actually vested as reserve? I'm not sure.
Yes. Well, to answer your last question first, yeah. Yes, it is my understanding the intention is that certainly the main gully area is vested as reserve, and it's intended to form a recreational resource as well as ensuring protection of this natural features of the gullies. So as to the best mechanism to ensure a coordinated approach to the gullies. There has been discussion about a gully management plan. Mr. Bird may actually be the best place to answer your questions about that, but it is certainly something that we have considered, and it is a possibility in terms of building in a requirement for a gully management plan to ensure a coordinated approach. But my understanding is that a fair amount of detailed design has to go into understanding what the stormwater effects would be on any particular gully, which obviously, you know, is usually a question of the detailed design at the time of subdivision. So it's not as if there aren't existing mechanisms that would require the effects on the gullies in terms of the erosion risk and the flooding risk, those type of natural hazard issues, as well as retaining natural landforms. All of those matters are already addressed in the requirements for regional council resource consents. They are already matters that are controlled under the regional council provisions.
So how critical is the vesting?
Can I just make a point too? The important point also is that, of course, if this plan change is approved, it becomes council's. It's no longer a private plan change at that point of time. It's council to oversee it. So, I mean, this is a conversation that I certainly want to have with Mr. Bonus and his team in terms of satisfying us that they are satisfied that they can control those matters. And that seems to me to be quite live. I mean, we've been talking today, I think we've been talking today in very broad terms about 3 management plans, potentially. There's a stormwater management plan, there's a gully management plan. There may even be a cultural issues or cultural values management plan, sort of things that one would ordinarily expect to be lying behind a large plan change area like this, but isn't, because it's a private plan change. So let's just flag those ones up for a conversation with Mr. Bonus tomorrow when we have that.
Yeah, I just want one more sort of while I'm there, Chair. So I guess in terms of, you know, and we haven't talked about it much. We've focused on other owners that have, other landowners that have made submissions and things as well. But with this 9.8 hectares, which contains the sort of 3, I guess, almost branches of the gully management plan, the Rangatira 8A6B2. You know, I wonder about the workability of that vesting, given that it is Māori land. Ms. Cleary, is that something that's sort of, that would rely on Māori Land Court approval, would it not? Or is that's not something that you had addressed?
Well, not in the limited time I've been involved with this plan change. No, I can't answer that for you. I'm not sure if it's something that Mr. Crawford has addressed previously as the structure plan was prepared once it was lodged. So, yeah,
doesn't look like it's me just yet.
Okay, well, maybe that's something that I can ask Mr. Maldoni and Mr. Crawford later, Chair. It's
well, you see Mr. Crawford there, so he may have an answer, in which case let's have it.
My understanding is, to be corrected by Mr. Maldoni, that you would not need the Māori Land Court approval to rezone land.
No, I was talking about the vesting of the reserve.
That would, yes, I believe that would.
Yeah, there's no question that the vesting of that Māori-owned land in council will require, or the approval of all of the landowners to begin with, which is no easy feat. And then also potentially the sanction of the Māori Land Court. So I suspect that if there is going to be a sort of a public domain or a public access of a sort of opportunity within that gully network, it's going to have to be a bespoke type arrangement which reflects and honours the fact that there is Māori land contained within it. So the land can be put to that public use, but in terms of legal ownership investing, it'll need its own special treatment.
Yeah. So just to interpret that, Mr. Maldoni, you're saying is there's nothing to prevent a plan change from actually indicating that that is what the intention is, but it's a whole different issue to actually realise the intention.
That's right, and also I think there's a distinction between it serving a public purpose and a community purpose and vesting. Typically, those public or community facilities are vested in council, but this might be a situation where it's a combination of ordinary freehold land within the Gulley network being vested in council, but those other parts that are Māori freehold land being treated differently. So in other words, we can still achieve the same public outcome without the vesting. And I suspect that's the kind of thing that you'd have to think through if we're ultimately going to get to that point where the Gulley network is going to perform that kind of public function. And if, I suppose just to finish the point there, that's entirely a matter that sits within the control of the owners of that Māori land. If they don't want to get on board with that outcome, then the plan change area is going to have to be developed in a slightly different way. And whatever departure from the structure plan that's then embarked upon, that'll just get assessed in the ordinary way.
Yeah, which in a sense takes us back to Mr. Bird's caution earlier on about the desirability of developing your stormwater system from downstream to upstream, so that in actual fact it flows properly. So, yep.
I mean, I think probably just while I'm on this, I mean, there's no question that one of the features of this plan change is that it is in multiple ownership. The plan change area is in multiple ownership, and that has its own layers of complexity. And then that's obviously compounded, if you like, by the fact that we are also dealing with Māori freehold land within it as well. But that's not to say that the rezoning and the land use rules associated with the land can't be changed. And then those land ownership issues tend to then fall into place in their own way. And I don't think that decision makers, although there are additional complexities associated with land ownership here, it doesn't mean that there can't be a new rule framework placed across the land. But again, I'll develop that submission a little bit further in reply, sir.
No.
Okay, well, obviously I've flagged it as something that we'll need to talk about further. Yep. Thanks,
I mean,
Chair.
no plan would ever be able to move forward if it required 100% concurrence. Simple fact of state. Yeah. Right. Okay. Kevin, any questions for Ms. Cleary at this point?
No, happy at the stage, thank you.
Happy is what we aim for. That's excellent. Yes, right. Thank you, Ms. Cleary, for the moment. As I say, we'll obviously talk more in some detail after we hear back from council and others tomorrow or Wednesday, whenever it happens to be. So thank you for the moment.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Sue. So that completes the evidence for the applicant group, subject to obviously anything that comes up in the reply. So happy to hand over now to the other submitters.
Thank you, Mr. Maldoni. Thank you very much. Right, so just reaching for my schedule. So Ms. Craven for the Regional Council, I think you're first up. I saw your name earlier. I'm not sure where you are now. Right. And I think you've got Mr. Palmer with you, have you?
Yes, I believe there we go. He's online as well.
Right, right. Now I'm not sure how long you've been on screen or listening. Were we here this morning or did you just come after lunch?
I've been on for about an hour, so yeah, I've not heard the earliest discussion this morning, but I've heard the recent discussion with Ms. Cleary on the Gulleys submission.
Okay, well, obviously we don't want you to read your submission, so let me invite you to tell us what you want to tell us.
Right, well, Kia ora koutou. Firstly, thank you very much to the panel for your time today. My name is Hannah Craven. I am a policy advisor for the Waikato Regional Council. I've been in this role for a year now and am involved in working with district councils within the Waikato to assist in the development of consistent integrated regional policy, which includes supporting and leading submissions to plan changes developed under the RMA. I'm here today with my colleague John, who is here to provide technical expertise in answering any questions you may have relating to the WRC submission.
Okay.
If you are happy, I'll just give a bit of a summary of our submission and our evidence, if that.
Yes, and obviously we're particularly interested, or more interested, in your responses to the applicant's responses to your submission, rather than your submission per se. So yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. So WRC staff, including myself, have engaged in multiple discussions with the applicant over the last few months, seeking to explain and resolve our submission and seeking amendment to the plan provisions. And it is my understanding that all parties involved are in agreement and recognise the issues associated with modifying natural gully systems, which was the key focus of our submission.
Yeah.
I have read the statements of evidence of the applicant and their rebuttal evidence released last week. And I just wanted to note that I think Mr. Bird for the applicant has slightly misinterpreted the position of Regional Council in his rebuttal evidence. We're not to say that we are opposed to gully modification full stop. We recognise that there may be a time and a place with careful planning for this. Our position is really that the plan changes notified didn't address the possible risks associated with modifying natural gully systems to both the development area and existing development downstream, and see no reason to leave these areas of geotechnical concern and hazard risk to be addressed during subdivision when the knowledge of these issues is already well understood at the rezoning stage. It's my view that the knowledge and experience of all our experts here today should influence the direction of policy through the plan change rather than be deferred for discussions at resource consent level, which we consider are likely to get difficult and repetitive once the land has been rezoned. WRC is in full support of the amendments to the plan provisions recommended by Ms. Cleary in her statements of evidence and rebuttal evidence. So to briefly summarise, I recommend amendments to the plan provisions to include the wording proposed by Ms. Cleary for the main objective, policy and environmental outcome for the structure plan area, which ensures the risk of erosion and exacerbation of flood risk from the downstream from the major gully systems in Nukuhau are avoided, remedied or mitigated, and the gully systems are maintained or enhanced. I also support the revised structure plan map that reflects the shape and position of the existing natural gully system rather than the indicative realigned network that the notified version showed. I also recommend insertion of new wording as recommended by Ms. Cleary for the assessment criteria for subdivision in the structure plan area to reference the WRC stormwater management and erosion guidelines. I noted in my evidence that inclusion of this wording is not unprecedented in district plans, and we consider it to be useful to guide development activities and demonstrate integration between regional and district council. The recommended amendments of Ms. Cleary reflect WRC's position that the Nukuhau gullies, despite existing modification, are still natural gullies. They are subject to natural hydrological processes, and these need to be carefully managed to prevent erosion and flooding. And overall, they seek to alert future subdividers from the outset of these risks and guide stormwater management practices to control use of the gullies as stormwater devices. In my opinion, the amendments reflect a more proactive and coordinated approach to resource management planning and will better achieve the direction as set out in the Waikato Regional Policy Statement, which directs plans to recognise, maintain or enhance the role of natural features to avoid or mitigate natural hazards and control subdivision use and development to not exacerbate hazard risks elsewhere. The amendments are also well aligned with the regional plan, Taupō District Council Stormwater Strategy and Taupō District Plan, which also already includes similar provisions for the Taupō Industrial Environment and Centennial Industrial Environment. I think that concludes my summary, so thank you very much. If you have any questions, John and I are more than happy to discuss further.
So there are no points of disagreement between WRC and what's now being proposed?
No, not anymore. The rebuttal evidence released on Friday really satisfied all of our remaining concerns.
Just to be crystal clear on that, without you can appreciate we're sort of trying to shuffle through different electronic versions here. So does that mean then that you agree with the amendment proposed in the bird evidence, the wording? Sorry, yes, that's inclusive and covered as well, is it?
Yes, I believe that Ms. Cleary does cover that also in her rebuttal evidence or refers to it. So yes, we're happy with both.
So just so everybody's aware, that's the clause 10 of Mr. Bird's evidence that relates to the predominantly clause. And I guess, Chair, I wonder if we could get a Word copy of the rule provisions and things as well before tomorrow. Might be useful. Thanks. Just for my annotation.
We have got a copy which from council, a Word copy of the 42A recommendations with the requesters recommendations as well, but it would be quite good to get that cleaned up.
Yeah, I mean current as of Friday.
We can do that before tomorrow, I guess. Let's see if we can.
Okay.
But I was just going to go to you, Mr. Palmer, to see whether you had anything to add in terms of what you've heard in the time that you've been listening.
No, I've got nothing to add at this stage. Thank you.
All right. Well, Kevin, have you got any questions for WRC?
No, the agreement with the parties works for me.
Just one question to you, Ms. Craven. I mean, there was a question at various points as to whether a formalised gully management plan of some sort should be developed. Do I take it now that WRC is no longer seeking that sort of comprehensive plan?
I think John will be helpful to answer this as well. We are obviously still very supportive of a gully management plan. I suppose that I don't think that it has to be mandated through the provisions. I think that all parties are in agreement that it should occur. John, did you have any comments as to?
Yeah, and that was something that I outlined in my evidence. And there's a lot of commonalities that we're seeing at the moment with additional development pressures around Taupo, not just the Nukuhau development. And it'd be good in a lot of ways, instead of having to tread over old ground time and time again, to just formalise some of the processes and protocols perhaps that we use around using gullies as stormwater conduits and all the risks, just so everyone's up front and aware of it all.
So let me ask you, is there anything that WRC is developing in terms of a guideline on these sorts of issues, or is that something that we might anticipate would come out of WRC as a general?
Yeah, I was envisaging, WRC and Taupō districts and others, maybe recreational groups as well, working together just to come up with some clear guidelines for developers going forward.
That would certainly be helpful from what I'm hearing. So, all right, thank you for that.
I've got a question, please. Mr. Palmer, in terms of some of those examples you'd provided around other areas of development, I think Lock Views was one of them. I guess presumably those were all consented as well. What confidence do you have that those things won't occur in this, or won't be repeated in the Nukuhau gullies?
Well, that'll be dependent on the detail that we see through the consenting process. But I believe that with careful management, the detail I haven't received yet, then that would greatly reduce the risk. But I suppose my concerns lie not only with what's going to happen in the immediate subdivision area, but the additional pressures of runoff from hard surfaces on the existing downstream network. So yeah, all those things just need to be taken into account when we move forward with, consenting of those discharges.
And do you think it's possible to have that careful management on a by subdivision approach rather than a by plan change area approach, or would you have a preference?
It would be, yeah, the greater, whatever process provides the greatest level of detail, it would be better for us, just so we can, just to make sure all the bases are covered moving forward with every different development.
I think on general, WRC was sort of considering that the amendments as have been proposed so far by Ms. Cleary, they are very similar to what we had initially proposed. And so I think the further detail would come through a resource consenting process, and that, the amendments that we have recommended or we're supporting now of the applicant go far enough away to ensure that those outcomes are going to be achieved.
So you're saying then that you're not seeking a gully management plan for the whole plan change area now?
We don't necessarily think that it has to be mandated through the plan provisions, but as John said, he envisaged that this would be a further conversation that would happen between councils and other involved groups.
And just to finish that off, the structure plan at the moment shows what you might call the main gully system. WRC has no particular issues with respect to the dry gullies that we were talking about earlier with in that sort of southern part of the plan change area.
John, you maybe have a better familiarity with gullies.
Yeah, so I've missed some of the earlier conversation, I'm afraid. So those gullies that you're talking about.
There is a series, in Mr. Bird's evidence, that there are a series of sort of southwest inclined dry gullies, which obviously are quite significant in terms of the available developable land area in that particular quadrant anyway.
Yeah. So taking it, you referring to figure 1. And I've only had a brief chance to read that, so obviously cannot comment in any detail, but it seems that because of effects on some of those properties around Doherty Drive and the Grove and places like that, from runoff coming from land, that the diversion into the main gully would probably be a sensible idea to stop future sort of impacts on those existing properties. But again, the devil will lie in the detail, and it'd be great to see, a more detailed proposal before commenting further.
Would that necessarily trigger a regional consent? Would any of this trigger? I mean, unless it was completely open, obviously then earthworks and so on come into play at that stage.
Exactly.
Scale.
Yeah.
But on a smaller scale, would that? I'm not quite. I can't recall the regional plan requirements around these sorts of issues.
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure either. Hannah.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't seem to me that necessarily does, but I just wanted to. I'm just thinking ahead for your own involvement if this proceeds. That's all.
Yeah, I couldn't confirm either, but I can follow up on that if that would be helpful.
Yeah, we don't need to know that. It's just I guess you're then relying upon district council to, I guess, to finesse your concerns. That's unless you choose to get involved as a submitter, obviously. Yep. All right. That's it. It's not really seeking an answer on that one. All right. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for your attendance and submission, and we'll see where we go with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Jane Penton for Lakes and Waterways Action Group. Ms. Penton, are you there?
Yes.
You are indeed. Right.
I think Carrie's going to put the visual on. I'm not sure. Sorry, I've only been party to the proceedings today, briefly, like half an hour or so. So I represent Lakes and Waterways Action Group, who are a long-standing advocacy group in the Taupō District, and we have probably about 150 people on our mailing list, and our meetings are fairly robust. We're quite familiar with planning processes, but as you can appreciate, we're lay submitters. I can tell by the level of scrutiny that you're giving the Regional Council, which I've just been listening to, that you do have some concerns about this plan and how it will unfold over time. And as you can see from our submission, the three areas that we're mostly concerned about are, first up, the stormwater management strategy in general, where the applicant has gone through the point score system with the Regional Council template, and we feel that they've gone for the minimum points more or less in that regard, which, considering they are looking at quite a few house lots, it seems that they could be setting a higher bar. So that was a disappointment to our group. We're always advocating with the District Council particularly, and also the Regional Council in their high-level planning documents and long-term planning documents, that they look into mandating water retention for rainwater. So that was something that seemed to be an easy one to promote at plan change level as well, given that the plan change is driven by developers rather than the council in this instance, even though it was indicated by a growth management strategy. It would be great to see some of these higher level promotions of sustainable development. So that's a disappointment. I don't know what you can do to remedy that at this stage, but that was an issue that we and the other one in that point is also the these so-called riparian corridors that are big around Taupō, a huge benefit for the ecology of Taupō. And this gully system, if it was replanted to a degree, especially the steep sides, would provide bird corridors that would link in with the river corridor, which is really, as the crow flies, only a few metres away from the southern end of the development, or the eastern southern end of the development. And on that regard, with the gully realignment, you're going to lose a lot of opportunities to have a fairly natural corridor with native plantings, and have a lot of multiple benefits for recreation, biodiversity, and unfortunately things are siloed off, as you probably know, in regional plans and district plans, so you don't really get that comprehensive look at these opportunities to have multiple benefits for landscape as well. The geophysical features, if you think about the caldera, you may not have given it much thought when the Regional Council are more concerned about stormwater issues and on flow-on effects from which can be cumulative as well, not just in intense rainfall, but some developments that we've had in the district, we've had continuing issues with siltation running off developments into neighbouring properties, across roads, blocking culverts, all sorts of things like that. You will have seen some of the evidence of the more intense events, but it does happen regularly with the pumice land. So we've got this caldera, we've got terracing, we've got gully systems that are valued by the community, and they have a natural form. So we feel that some of these should be sort of under the landscape provisions as well, which wasn't dealt with, as far as I can see, at all in the landscape assessment by TDC. So there's quite a lot in that area. And on the other hand, we support that there have been some amendments in the evidence from Regional Council, and that these have been accepted by the I've got the lawyer's evidence, haven't I, Mr. Birds? So that's a plus. We can see the benefits of that. But as you say, how will it unfold in the planning regime? So I guess that's a question, really.
It's a
The
question
district,
that
the
very
district
alive.
council plan is under review, but that hasn't progressed. This is a plan change. It's going to set a precedent. As with every subdivision in the district, it will set a precedent. So it'll be great at this stage to have the strength of some guidelines. And I'm just assuming that the amendments will be effective on the mapping of this subdivision, which I haven't really heard how that will unfold in the last hour. And also, you know, maybe it is a missed opportunity to get some stronger provisions there. I'm a bit concerned with the district plan, the district council, evidence talks about modification. The regional council evidence talks about modification, but it's not defined, you know, what's acceptable. So I guess that's the bottom line for us. And the wastewater, I'll just briefly say that we support the district council provisions on that issue, and that we would like to see the Acacia Bay wastewater brought to town as well. That's a big forward planning process that the district council is undergoing, at least a feasibility, or if not a practical study of how that might unfold in this long-term plan round. So we've been wanting that for a long time. And we think that the district council have got it right in having consolidated urban development close to town, but there are these, I don't think the gullies personally should be treated lightly and just compromised, because that leads to further compromise of gullies in the district, and notwithstanding the erosion effects.
We've certainly heard you on that matter. So
thank you very much.
And you will have heard us questioning as well on that whole issue. So thank you for your submission, and just hang in there whilst I just check to see whether my colleagues have questions of you. Dale, have you any questions of Miss Penton?
I was just interested in terms of this reference to gullies acting as ecological corridors, whether there was examples already within the district where, am I right in hearing, are you saying in terms of landscaping provisions, is that inclusive of the planting types that you're talking about? So,
yeah, the regional area at Whakaipo Bay has a mixture of retired gullies, just as part of the regional plan for soil conservation, but there are now a lot of initiatives around the district, including in that area where the gullies are planted up with natives and fenced off, and also all along the Waikato River corridor that is being done, even removal of pine trees and then and blackberry and then planting of gullies. So it's very dear to the community's heart. And the Greening Taupō initiative, you can look it up online. They're an amazing group, and they're running with this, include also bike taupō, so recreational benefits. And it is now seen that we, even at the higher level of the plan change for the Lake Taupo Protection Project, that when they converted some lands to forestry, they missed an opportunity to plan for bird corridors with, say, the Poriora forest. So it is something that's a lot more, there's a lot more connectivity happening, and every time you miss an opportunity, that's one less opportunity for those riparian and or ecological corridors to be instated.
thank you.
Kevin, any questions?
No, more of a comment, and just in support of the submission, with certainly the work that Greening Taupō are doing around, and I don't see, I guess maybe a question, Jane, are you suggesting that we look for some instrument to mandate this, or go with the method of operation that Greening Taupō currently have in accessing land for development of planting as they're currently doing, which to my mind is actually working really well right across, certainly from Wairake Drive through into town.
Yeah, I would see the gully, the natural gully, as a reserve, and then as a reserve, it contributes to the reserve component of the plan. It keeps everybody happy, and you can have a design that fits with the district plan, regional policy, and with these initiatives to have. You don't always have a track down the middle of a gully in Taupō because that's where the water does run, but you can put it slightly to the side and you can avoid that issue of, so when it's dual use for recreation, you could have a track slightly to the side of the main water flow area, and then an appropriate planting. So it's easy to maintain over time, and it's planned properly, and many experts in that area are already here in Taupō, so it's not a new thing for us. And then you get you probably know volunteers doing the planting in stages, so it's all doable. Yeah, Contact Energy have a huge amount of their land is retired, and it's just across the road, actually, across Poihipi Road, which they're going to modify apparently for this development. But that northern access area, across the road from there, there's gullies planted up, now that I recall, and areas planted up by the same group, and down by the river. So, this could be a good policy for the whole district, this multiple benefit process, but I don't know how it unfolds it. I got it wrong. I said here structure plan, which it's not a structure plan, it's a plan change. It's a high level plan. So it would be great if it could set a precedent somehow.
Thank you, Ms. Penton. I appreciate the submission from you and your group, and we'll certainly take those matters on board. So thank you for presenting.
All right, yeah, there's a lot of wonderful, and we're really lucky here because a lot of our officers have a lot of knowledge, and it's just matching up all the planning, I think, is the challenge. Thank you.
It is indeed. It is. Thank you. Right, next on my list is Mr. Sapsford for Waikato.
Kia ora koutou.
Right.
Tēnā koutou, Claude Owen Sapsford, taku ingoa. I'm speaking for Bike Taupō Advocacy Group today in support of our submission and brief of evidence on the plan changed. I'd like to say a few brief words on the applicant's rebuttal evidence and also some of the points which were raised earlier today. I've kind of been listening when able to the proceedings earlier today. On the outset, I feel that it's important to make clear that we do not oppose the proposed plan change and subsequent development. We just want to ensure that this development is supported by adequate cycling infrastructure for the existing and new communities to use. Currently, the cycling infrastructure is generally substandard to non-existent in the area between the structure plan area and Taupō town. The proposed plan change and the majority of evidence presented seems to have ignored or even downgraded the importance of providing such infrastructure, even though it is specifically... Sorry, can you hear me okay or not?
Yeah, no, I can hear you fine.
Okay. Even though it's specifically mentioned in key objectives and policy in the district plan. I do note, however, that the evidence of Richard Swears and some of the comments made earlier today by Mr. Crawford, etc., have shown some positive recognition of the importance of this issue. Bike Taupō is of the view that safe and effective cycling infrastructure is as important as the wider transport infrastructure issues, which appear to be one of the key focal points of the evidence presented. It is our view that if you have effective biking infrastructure, then this may actually mitigate some of the issues associated with vehicular congestion at Control Gates Bridge and other locations. Appropriate cycling infrastructure will also realise the benefits of the proximity of the site to Taupō town in respect to active travel and transport opportunities. We note that a lot has been made of the proximity benefits of the proposed plan change by a lot of those providing evidence in support of the plan change. However, from a biking perspective, we feel that this benefit is akin to telling someone who is looking to buy a house on the banks of a rapidly flowing piranha-infested river that it's just a short swim to get to the town on the other side of that river. In response to comments made by the applicants in respect to the ability of cyclists to navigate neighbourhood roads from the northern part of the proposed development to the bottom of Norman Smith Street. I generally agree with them in that once you are off Acacia Bay Road, which is only going to get busier, there are relatively safe options going into town using quiet streets and alleyways from the northern part of the development. As noted by Richard Swears, they could do with a bit of an upgrade to be even more user-friendly though. In saying this, I think it is important to note that when talking about people on bikes, the preferred route going downhill may be different to that going up the alleyways. Going up, as some of these alleyways, etc., are quite steep, but they're quite fun when you've got gravity assisting you on the way down. Notwithstanding the positive effect that e-bikes are having on such routes, routes utilising roads and footpaths may be prioritised by people on bikes heading up the hill from the bottom of Norman Smith Street, rather than these alleyways referred to get to the northern side of part of the subject site. In finishing, I want to tautoko your earlier comment, Chair. COP26, that sums it up for us. We need to proactively and tangibly provide for active mode choice now if we want to make a real difference for the future for our mokopuna. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sapswood, and thank you for being so concise. I don't have any questions. I mean, your group submission is very, very clear. And you'll appreciate that there's a limit to what we can do through a structure plan change effectively. But as you've heard through the day, there's certainly willingness in terms of the provision writers to provide for active modes, whether it be micromobility or some other form. I guess we'll look to further that as much as we can. Kevin, have you got some questions of Mr. Sapswood or any comments you wish to make?
No, more of a comment. Both this submission and the earlier comments align clearly with the Waikato Regional Land Transport Plan, particularly around mode shift, active modes, walking and cycling. So from my mind, it's right on song. So thank you.
Dale?
I just thank you for your submission, and I notice you're a person that's out and about. I just wondered, as someone who's not really a cyclist, whether e-bikes play a significant part of the picture or not in Taupō or in this area, and whether you would include those as part of your mandate, or you specifically, how do e-bikes fit in in terms of your submission?
No, e-bikes are a significant part of it, and yeah, I mean the growth in e-bikes over the past few years, and by memory, I think I may have included some stats on that, has had a significant positive impact in the amount of people that are on bikes. What it has done is actually broadened the range of people who are now choosing to ride bikes, and that's not just on our trails, but also from a commuting basis as well. And when we're looking at this side of the river, there's a bit of gradient involved in that. So e-bikes are only going to make it easier for people to commute from the north side of the river to town, and many of our members ride e-bikes on a regular basis, both for recreation and for commuting as well. And just observing, because I tend to look out for people on bikes, the amount of people on e-bikes rather than acoustic bikes, as we call them, is probably growing at a rate far higher than non-e-bikes. So, and that's one of those, it's actually a real game changer for that kind of modal shift. E-bikes means now that getting on a bike and going into work just makes that decision a lot easier for a lot of people, especially with hills and other environmental factors.
Are there public charging facilities as such, or is it something that people tend to take care of themselves?
At this stage, they tend to take care of them themselves, but we have been advocating for those around town, and there has been discussion about one to go on the lakefront near where the Roberts Street redevelopment is going to occur, and that's to cater for a lot of those people that use the the lakefront pathway there.
Okay, final question, just for context again.
All
Does
good.
Taupō have those facilities available where, you use your app and you pick up a bike and use it back and forth, or is it more personal use?
Yeah, it's mainly personal use. You certainly got that for scooters, electric scooters, and there's a lot more people on electric scooters now as well, which is also a positive, and practical form of transport as opposed to jumping in a car as well.
Thanks, Chair.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Atwood. Thanks.
Got it. Thank you.
Mr. Bartley, you're already on screen, so you're already warmed up, ready to go. Right.
Can you hear me okay?
Can indeed. Yep.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. This is a submission, just a brief verbal one from Watteney Lane Limited. My name is Bruce Bartley. I've lived in Taupō since 1979 and more recently in Kinloch. I have a civil engineering degree from Canterbury University. Amongst other interests, I've been involved with land development here over 26 years, since about 1995. These include Cameron Drive and the Glen above Acacia Bay, and Loch Eagles, the Larches, and Seven Oaks in Kinloch. These all add up to about 450 residential lots over 5 projects, quite often with multiple stages. In the early 2000s, I was also involved in a private plan change 23, which was for new urban development in the Marlborough Valley between Taupo and Kinloch. The plan change was achieved, but the project was overtaken by events and did not proceed. That overtaking event, by the way, was the global financial crisis, which arrived in 2007. I'm presently engaged with others in a small land development at Watteney Lane, which is within the very northwestern corner of the PPC 37 land. Watteney Lane will develop only 9 sections, which are large at more than 5,000 metres each. It will not impinge on infrastructure to any measurable extent, and the development does not require this plan change to be in effect. It's not an urban density development. I serve as an independent trustee on the board of Amplify, which is the economic development agency for the Taupō District Council. And in my present occupation, I stay very aware of the growth of this district, especially with regard to residential land and the factors which affect both demand and supply. So I'm not here appearing as an expert witness, nor am I an advocate for any particular cause. I can only offer an opinion, but my background demonstrates that this could be considered an informed opinion based on actual experience in the development industry in Taupo over the last 25 years. So this submission is in support of the private plan change in its entirety. We support it for 5 reasons. The first one, Taupo is running out of land for residential use. The TDC long-term planning to date has not made sufficient provision for new residents and growth. In my opinion, the growth models used by TDC are woefully inadequate, and these include the recent report from Property Economics that was commissioned by the TDC. For example, New Zealand's statistics continues to predict that the district population will peak at about 41,000 and then decline. Well, these predictions fail the test of common sense. I mean, ask yourself, why is it going to decline? The population in the district is already more than the maximum predicted by Statistics New Zealand, and the rate of growth is increasing, it's not decreasing. Our own modelling suggests that the population of the district by 2050 is likely to be 60 to 65,000 people. And the PPC 37 land here will be needed to help carry this burden. Point number 2, Kinloch, where I have quite a bit of involvement and where I live, will also grow significantly over the next 10 to 20 years. And the proposed new alignment of Poihipi Road to a new large roundabout will be fantastic. That would be a welcome benefit to all of the people who now live in Kinloch. By way of explanation, the present intersection at the top of Control Gates Hill, where Poihipi Road meets Waireki Drive, has been improved by the traffic lights lower down the hill on Norman Smith Street, but it is still a dangerous and awkward intersection, and its replacement will be welcome. Reason number 3, the bridge is close to capacity, certainly at rush hour times. But rather than exacerbating a problem, I'd suggest that this plan change provides the solution. The simplest avenue for funding a second bridge is to require a separate development contribution from all new sections created within the PPC 37. If you don't have that, how are you going to fund the new bridge? It's a matter of which comes first, chicken or egg, but they really have to go together. The 4th reason we support this is that the figure of 780 new lots is a calculation, but in practical terms, it is a little overstated. It won't be that big. Not all lands within the plan change will develop to the maximum extent possible. For example, our Watani Lane site will have only 9 new lots, not the 60 or so that could happen under standard residential zoning. In addition, it takes quite a few years for new sections to be delivered. We have some at Loch Eagles that we built 20 years ago that are still sitting there empty in the sun. So the development of housing to follow the sections is a very gradual ramp, and this allows plenty of time for communities and infrastructure to adapt. And the 5th and final reason for our support is just that it would seem that Nukuhau is the natural site for new development. New residential areas are required, and this location close to the CBD would seem to be the next logical place. If you just look at a map like a child and say, where is it going next? I think Nukuhau is where you would end up. So, and Commissioner, that ends my submission.
Thank you, Mr. Bartley. That's a very helpful summary of points. So do I take it that you don't agree with Mr. Heath, who indicated today that he didn't anticipate that there'd be more than a demand for more than 140 dwellings over the next 10 years in Nukuhau?
No, I think there is tremendous demand and increasing demand for people to shift to Taupō. Taupō is not growing based on births and deaths. It's growing by internal immigration within New Zealand, and helped by COVID as more people have more choice. And you know, we're in a virtual world right now at this meeting. More people have more choice, and they're choosing to live in the nice lifestyle areas like Taupō and Kaunihera. So I think there's more demand than the world realizes.
Can I pick up on that, please, Chair? I guess I'm interested in terms of your experience as a developer, and you've touched on it a little bit there with COVID and this alternative universe that we're all finding ourselves struggling to cope with. Really, I wondered whether you were already noticing any trends, or what changes do you think might be needed in terms of offerings to the market, or how that might influence the design in terms of the shift towards people being able to work from home? Is that something that would influence, do you think, what's being offered, or would it still be conventional kind of approaches to subdivision?
It's a good question. The projects that I talk about generally are higher in the market. We're not production builders.
Yeah.
Those subdivisions are all sort of the higher quality ones. That gives us confidence to continue to develop, to create sections as high quality as we can. We're doing this at Seven Oaks. There's a lot of extra stuff goes in. We're confident that the market will respect that. And the reason is the people who have choice of where they live quite often have good resources. And this isn't budget housing by any means. It's not really where Taupō has gone, but we're confident to put the extra money into higher quality development. And I guess what we're thinking there is, look, there's just going to be more and more. At Seven Oaks, we have a consent for 166 lots. We've built and delivered 27. We're working right now on the other 137, and we've sold about 100 of those. So there's strong demand for good quality development prospects.
And I guess what I'm getting at is it's not necessarily, well, you know, there's this, as part of this plan change, there's a move towards a proposed medium density zone as well. But I guess the market will influence how those are taken up. But you're saying you support all of those parts as well.
Yeah, I think variation of what's on offer is important in any community.
Get it down? Okay, Kevin?
No questions. Just my observation of around town and what's going on aligns with what Bruce has said. So I thank you for your assessment and your comments and your submission.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bartley. Yeah, appreciate the submission made.
Right. Thank you.
Next is Sarah Davidson from the Taupō Business Chamber. Is she with us?
No, but I am Rory Scott, President, Taupō Business Chamber.
Right, Mr. Scott, thank you.
I'll keep this short and sweet, guys, because some high-level discussion going on. But the main reason that we wanted Taupō Business Chamber to speak today was to re-emphasise our initial support of the plan change and confirm our own ongoing support for the plan change for the reasons we stated in our original submission. But as some additional information, we've not received any additional feedback since the additional comments and evidence was sought. So our original submission stands. Long story short, we consider that the additional housing options are critical for the growth and sustainability of the district. And to follow on from what was said before, we're seeing the demand. So we're in support.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Appreciate that. And the business chamber has no issues or some issues in terms of the congestion, traffic congestion issue around the gate and the roundabouts.
We in our original submission we put it out to our membership for comments, and it didn't come through as something that was overtly concerning. I would say that we're not really qualified, I would say, to have a valuable comment on that. I guess if on the balance of things, we're confident that this can be managed and is being managed by the appropriately qualified people, and the balance of either having the additional houses or not isn't sufficient to not support the application.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you. Kevin, comment?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. Scott. Thanks for taking the time to make the submission. Thank you. Yeah. Right. Now, I'm just looking at the time. It's sort of past, so we've got half an hour, Mr. Hendricks, and then contact to get through. So just be mindful of that, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. And welcome, Mr. Hendricks.
Thank you, Chairman Hill. Kia ora koutou all. My name is Thomas Hendricks. I think the only person here who might be familiar with me is Councillor Taylor from my time at Taupō Baptist. The very quick background for me is that I am for sure a armchair urban planner. I have been involved in projects in my native Charlotte, North Carolina, which is slightly larger than the Auckland Metro. And including time spent in Uganda and East Africa, helping to design and lay out new property acquisition for a nonprofit organization looking to establish villages of 200 to 300 acres for 20-year development plans, including churches, labs, on-site clinics, as well as children rescue villages with on average 3,000 children per village scattered throughout several hundred homes. So a very, again, armchair, no degree to my name. I am very much not the expert opinion. However, I have spent many days reviewing a lot of the documents, and I will, as passionately and not rudely as my Southern American self can be, try to pull up a few points that I would like to raise, please.
Right.
I would like to tautoko what Mr. Bartley was saying as far as the increase in traffic of people looking to move outside of the traditional centers. Actually, just this last week, Real Estate New Zealand revealed that over the lockdown in Auckland, where I currently reside, my wife is an architect, and so we needed to be in the big smoke. Real Estate New Zealand said that their website alone shows 228,000 Aucklanders in lockdown looking for property elsewhere to move right now. So for sure, we cannot plan and move forward without taking that into a densification conversation, that there is a very real hunger for people to leave and to move out and to relocate. I acknowledge as well that Stats New Zealand showed that for the first time in history, Auckland's population, instead of growing by the 1.8% that it has been averaging year after year, it actually dropped and was a negative 0.1%, which may not sound massive as a negative 0.1, but compared to nearly 2% annual growth with no stop, that's like stopping the machine wheels of the Chinese economy for 6 months. It's massive. I will flip over now to a couple of points on my submission regarding gray water and the Three Waters proposals. Again, I will just state here, I have several questions that I will find easier to share via screen share. So I will pop up the particular points that I am referencing here just for ease of clarification.
Right.
So in the attachment seen here in section 42A report, my request about gray water systems to be mandatory for residences to lower their impact during, of course, heavy rains and to aid in drought resistance. The rejection was because it was unable to be mandated through the existing statutory framework. However,
Mr. Hendricks, I'm not quite sure what's happened on my screen. I've still got you on voice, but my screen has completely disappeared. So carry on, but just be aware that I can't see anything.
So
right.
Just Chair, we've got him on screen here, and we can see the attachment C1 with a shared screen. So we've got him here.
Righto, you just carry on, and presumably when you come off shared screen, I might come back to you, but we'll see.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. So I will note here that says it's unable to be mandated. However, statutory framework allowed Kapiti Council to, in 2009, make it compulsory for all new homes to have an alternative non-drinkable water supply, untreated rainwater and or gray water system for outdoor washing machine and toilet flushing. So clearly there is room somewhere in the statutory rules for that to be managed. Whether that's through the exact plan change or not, that's not exactly the point I would like to raise. It's that it is something that is possible. And as we're looking at and talking about all these different issues today, as I've been listening since this morning, it's very clear we have more of an appetite to deal with these issues in macro rather than repetitively with every single subdivision or resource consent application. I'll now flip over to Appendix F, Stormwater Management Report, Section 4.4, which notes in the upper level comments that rainwater reuse tanks is an option for all scenarios, which flies in the face of the rejection of my proposed request. Then moving that along, apologies, in the Waikato region documentation, there is actually, apologies, I just need to get my page number here. There is actually on page 44 of this document that there is the section 6A, which is to avoid as far as practicable the adverse effects on natural hydrological characteristics and processes through methods such as low impact urban design and development, and adopting sustainable design technologies such as the incorporation of rain gardens, rainwater harvesting, and gray water recycling techniques where appropriate, especially when dealing with needing to mitigate how much water we're potentially allowing into the gullies and looking at potentially in gully or side of gully water retention. Rainwater, gray water systems are absolutely the at source first line of defense that should be utilized. I have other points to that, but I'm going to avoid those for brevity at the moment.
Okay.
I will also cite that on page 71, my response of section 42A report is notated as far as investigating and utilizing available hydropower in-pipe systems for new construction was rejected as not a TDC requirement, nor is it something that TDC is considering. What I will say with that very quickly is that there are designs around the world currently utilized, including in the, I want to say it's a 6-meter pipe that goes 100 miles to deliver water to New York City, as a macro example, that in the piping, there are hydro blades that the entire length of the piping, the water naturally moving is generating electricity. And another place in the comments rebuffing my suggestion here to look at this was that Nukuhau is already piped. Well, the water may reach the existing area in Nukuhau, but we're talking about kilometers worth of piping that's going to be needed to be installed inside this plan area along all of the new roads and in the new subdivisions for 780, however many residences. My suggestion is that given the environment, especially reflecting COP26 and some of the other initiatives of government to look at alternative ways to reduce carbon footprints, one of the things we could do is look at utilizing this as a test trial system for Aotearoa, New Zealand, by using the lucid pipes, as they're called, that generate point of install electricity, essentially. So they power the street lights directly above the water pipes. They power the locals' traffic lights. In some areas, in the Norwegian areas, they're putting them in so that way they also, the natural electricity that they shed, they warm up the sidewalks so the sidewalks don't freeze on frosty mornings to keep pedestrians safe. So there are options out there where instead of having to fly through the Middle East and go through an airport where every step you take powers the electricity for the building because they have the new depression energy systems, we could actually do that in Taupō. The vast majority of this current plan change is looking to keep everything status quo. Nobody else would really notice anything other than new houses coming online in 3 or 4 years in Taupō. This is an opportunity amongst several other initiatives to actually be Aotearoa leading. I'm not sure, councillors, when the last time is that you stopped and read the lyrics of our national anthem, but in, I believe it's verse 4, we're actually called to be in the nation's vanguard, to actually lead the way. That's actually something that we mean when we sing our national anthem. And so projects like this present us a very rare opportunity to, as mentioned before, set the precedent for continued development around the Taupō district, and especially urbanizing more reaches of Taupō. And the last point that I would make is that with the medium density and the northern low density housing abutting contact energy, we absolutely need to take a look at what would be available for rain roofs and green roofs. I note that my submission on that, I don't see included. I haven't found that in the report. I'm sure it's there somewhere. But being able to actually stylize those homes with the requirement that undulating contours of the roof lines towards the contact energy side with green roofs to enhance the flora and fauna of the area through the natural processes, aiding in the bees restoration to the area, allowing some bird corridors to be enhanced by that, would also serve the dual purpose of muting the noise the same way outside of the airports. We're now installing undulating rolling hills to help dampen the sound of airports from nearby neighbors. Doing that with the roof lines oriented towards contact energy may look slightly cookie cutter. And again, it would be a trial, but at worst, we would have better regulated environments in those homes with the temperature controls. We would have better support for the flora and fauna through those corridors. And if it ends up being something that people come by and say, hey, isn't that cool? That was a neat thing that they tried. It didn't quite work out, but hey, good on them giving it a shot. I think we'd rather be known for those things that we try to give a shot, like hosting Ironman for the first time, however many years ago, when people said, really, Taupō's going to pull off Ironman? And now it's consistently voted the #1 Ironman by athletes and tours. So I think it's time for us to start looking outside the status quo of just what's required to get housing out there and to provide bike lanes, and to actually look at a few of these other things that would enable us to do it to a higher quality and would still also provide for some safety and hopefully allow for some co-financing as well on public, private, and national government and local financing.
Thank you, Mr. Hendricks, and certainly thank you for your enthusiasm. And I'm sure we'll get some responses tomorrow if you want to tune in on that to your ideas there. Kevin, any observations or questions for Mr. Hendricks?
No questions. Thank you for your submission, Thomas. Appreciate that. And look, really interesting, fascinating stuff. The link to Kapiti, that information, that wasn't in the original submission, was it?
No, I did not have that originally, but I can submit that.
I don't remember reading that. So yes, so thank you. Yep.
Dale? Right. Been a lengthy day. So, yep.
Thank you.
So thanks for hanging in there, Mr. Hendricks, and keep listening. Right. Thank you. Our final submitter for the day, well, I think it's the final one, is Contact Energy. Mr. Baldwin, Mr. Crisp. Mr. Crisp, are you solo, or have you got Mr. Baldwin in tow?
Mr. Baldwin is there too, somewhere. There he is.
Right. Hopefully you can say it's all solved.
Pretty close, sir. So yeah, we will be brief. So obviously my evidence outlines the issue. We've also tried to outline the solution. So we've taken very much a live and let live approach in terms of the proposal, even to the extent that we came up with the idea of doing a land swap to assist the developer to get themselves a better alignment of the new section of Poihipi Road.
And that's a really good initiative. I've got to say, when I first saw the plans, I wonder what on earth was going on. So well done.
Yeah, well, it was a sort of genuine case of putting your money where your mouth is. We're not, we accept the outcome of TD 2050, and we always knew that was going to happen. But our submission is a contact submission is not about sort of whether it should happen, but rather under what circumstances. And essentially, it's really just to protect the integrity of the ongoing operation of that part of the geothermal steam field, which is called the Karapiti area. It's a very, very important part of Contact's operation in terms of being able to re-inject fluid into the ground, which helps with the sustainability of the resource and also avoids adverse effects in terms of what used to happen in the past where it was discharged to the Waikato River. And in terms of a land use sense, I mean, the key issue is really, day-to-day operations are pretty benign. It's really when it comes down to drilling, which is not only in the case of drilling new wells, but in situations where you actually have to go back and do maintenance of existing wells, because silica builds up in the well, which reduces the diameter of the bore, which means you periodically got to get in there and drill it back out to maintain a suitable level of operation. So, and when the drilling rig comes along, it can be there for, easily sort of 30 to 60 days, depending on how deep you're drilling and things like that. And it's a 24/7 operation. And with, all the best, best practice in the world, it still makes a fair bit of noise. It's lit up like a Christmas tree for health and safety reasons, and it just goes continuously. So you can understand that can create an effect that people in a residential environment not overly happy with. So the solution in terms of the live and let live is to have a covenant in place. There is already a covenant on the title, but it relates to effects on the land physically. It doesn't relate to human elements such as noise and visual effects and things like that. So you mentioned, Sir, earlier this morning about you referred to a district plan mechanism. Interestingly enough, the Taupō District Plan is one of the few district plans that actually incorporates a requirement for restrictive covenants. If you look at Rule 4B.3.1, that is the first of the subdivision rules in the rural environment. And if you serve up within a certain defined area on map D3, if you serve up a subdivision consent application with a covenant forming part of the supporting documentation, then you are a controlled activity. If you fail to do that, you then become a restricted discretionary activity where reverse sensitivity effects then can be taken into account. So the Taupō District Council has gripped up on this in the past and come up with district plan mechanisms that work and have been very successful. Now, in this instance, we're not proposing to go down that rule framework type approach. We're trying to take the same approach that we took immediately across the road, across Wairaki Drive, in relation to the Taupō Heights subdivision, where what we're saying is, look, here's the covenant. We've got a side agreement as well, which includes things like the land swap arrangement. And in terms of an update on that, as Hamish Crawford said this morning, yesterday he provided us with comments back from CN Top's lawyers. That has gone to our lawyers today. They are currently reviewing it and will probably be able to respond to that probably later today or tomorrow. We might not get to the point where we actually have a deal by the close of the hearing, but I'm confident that we'll certainly get to that point before you release your decision. And so we can advise you as and when that occurs, and so that, on the expectation that it does occur, then you can, or put it this way, you will have no reason to decline the plan change on the basis of any concern raised by contact.
Right. So let me just be clear then. In the event that you're not successful,
yep,
are you looking for a decline? That's
what the submission seeks, sir. Yes, because basically the point is that if we don't have put in place this mechanism, then what we have is a seriously unmitigated effect with significant effects.
Yeah.
And we're talking about the ability to manage a resource which is identified as being of national significance, and in the world of climate change, renewable energy, electricity generation is becoming increasingly important. So it's a serious matter. And there's all sorts of flow, as I was talking about before, in terms of there's flow on downstream, literally flow on effects if you can't re-inject. And it's really hard to find re-injection areas because it's all about permeability.
Yeah.
And and just one other thing on that, sir, you raised an issue was in the context of the discussion with the geotechnical engineer about this tomo that's about 15 metres deep, and you asked about the re-injection. So the re-injection that is occurring at Karapiti is approximately 2,000 metres deep.
Yeah, no. I fully understand that. Yeah. There was no linkage between the tomo and my query. My query was because, as you well know, there's all sorts of bad press on fracking around the world. I mean, when I did the re-injection consents, well, I recollect writing the decision on the fracking elements on that one, and I didn't give it a great deal of weight. But we know that it is an issue, and certainly if you don't have the covenants, then that one is going to bite you in due course as well. So
yeah, so in the geothermal industry, the word fracking is not used. There is, it's called well enhancement.
There's all sorts of delightful workaround phrases on that matter.
Yes, but also the important point in that regard, sir, is I think that you'll find that well enhancement or fracking, whatever you want to call it, is something that's done in relation to production rather than re-injection. It's about breaking open the rock to get the what you're seeking out of the ground, and that's not.
It cuts both ways.
Yeah,
it does. But that's not the point. The point is that, that if you're unsuccessful by the time that we get to issuing a decision, Contact would seek a decline of the applicant.
That's the position, sir. We don't expect to be there, and we don't want to be there.
Understood.
But at the end of the day, we've got to look after the resource and the ability to use it. So.
Understand that perfectly, and let me indicate to you in terms of time frames. I have currently 4 plan changes around the country, all waiting for decision, and I've got another 3 in the next 3 weeks. So the prospect that there's going to be a decision on this one in the next couple of weeks is negligible.
Yeah, and we would like to strike while the iron's hot, while people have warmed up to this issue and get it sorted sooner rather than later. And so just finally, I'd like to say I agree entirely with what Mr. Muldowney said this morning in terms of this type of mechanism being appropriate in this situation. As you're aware, sir, I'm involved not only for Contact but also with Fonterra. I deal with reverse sensitivity issues a lot, and I agree with Mr. Muldowney entirely that separation of incompatible land uses, that's a fundamental planning principle. And that's your ideal outcome. But in this situation, they're going to be literally across the fence, so we have to manage that interface. And we've not only done it through, it's not just solely reliant on the covenant. We have done other things in terms of putting the road on the boundary, having a bund and landscaping along there as well. So we've tried to do other things as well. So there's a little bit of out of sight, out of mind sort of phenomenon as well, and a bit of distance in terms of separation. Yeah.
Totally understand. So thank you for that. I don't know, Mr. Baldwin, whether you want to add anything to that, or you're just here minding the minders.
I don't have anything in particular to hand to cover off there, but Mark's summed it up pretty well. But yeah, look, like he says, that encumbrance is in process, and hopefully we can wrap it up pretty quick. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Any questions that you want to make?
Oh, I eagerly await the results of their negotiation, but no questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I understand.
Thanks, Dale.
Thanks.
Right. All right. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. Thanks for coming in and updating us. And certainly, yes, as soon as you've got a result, we'll be keen to hear, and whether that's through Mr. Muldowney or just you float that in subsequent to the hearing, just let us know.
Yeah, well, if we send it to the council and copy in Mr. Muldowney. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you for that.
Sure.
Right. Well, I think we've got there with 7 minutes to spare. That's excellent timing. Thank you, everybody that's contributed today. And we will now adjourn until, Mr. Muldowney, is there anything that you need to tell us before we adjourn?
No, sir. I was just giving you the courtesy of letting you know I'm still here and ready for you to sign off. That was all.
Well, I don't know. You could easily have programmed that for 20 minutes ago, and I wouldn't be any the wiser, would I? Yes. These days, it's wonderful how you can do things. Yes, I've got no idea with when Mr. Hendricks was sharing the screen why it completely blanked me out. I haven't had that before, so that's something I'll investigate. All right, well, we're at a point of adjournment till, I'm not sure if it's 9 or 9:30 tomorrow morning. Let me just check it's 9 o'clock apparently, or at least 5 minutes
Yeah,
past
it's 9.
Yes, thank you. So yes, we're adjourned until 9 o'clock in the morning. Have a good evening, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners.